We always have a policy in Pearland of recognizing special events and special people. And it is our recognition time here. Our city council back here supports us on all of the things we do in the way of recognizing individuals. So you're the ones that count. You're the people that make us, give us the inspiration to make Pearland an even better city than we are today. We have a proclamation tonight that I would like to present, and to do that, Charlotte, why don't you step up here, and also maybe we could ring around, and let me present this proclamation back over here where we get a little good shot from our cameraman. You want the rest of your group to be
Yeah,
here?
we would like them. If we can do a picture, that'd be great.
Don't get nervous because it's Mental Health Month. But we've got a solution. It's all in the proclamation. And this is the group that's going to help make that happen. And Charlotte here is the representative from that organization. Well, let me present this for you, and I'll ask you if you could give us some comments when I finish, and maybe any comments from the organization.
That would be great.
I got that? Okay. Proclamation, Office of the Mayor, City of Pearland, and this speaks on behalf of all of our city council members here and our staff. Whereas mental health is essential to everyone's overall health and well-being, and all Americans experience times of difficulty and stress in their lives. And whereas good mental health helps us face difficult and stressing occasions in our lives, with 1 in 4 adults experiencing mental health problems, with 1/2 of chronic mental illness beginning age 14.
Yes, sir.
And whereas mental illness adversely affects one's ability to adapt and often offers life-threatening occasions in nature, with prevention being an effective way to reduce the burden of mental health conditions. Whereas business, schools, government agencies, and healthcare providers and citizens share the burden of mental health problems, and with early and effective treatment, those individuals with mental health conditions can recover and lead full, productive lives. Now, therefore, I, Tom Reed, by the power vested in me as the mayor of this fine city of Pearland, Texas, do hereby proclaim that the month of May, that's next month, next of May, Mental Health Month. So we still got a little time here. In Pearland, and I ask all citizens, both near and far, to join with me as we proclaim the month of May 2017 as Mental Health Awareness Month to promote understanding of the importance of mental health, the steps our citizens can take to protect their mental health, and the need for appropriate and sensible and accessible services also for all people with mental health conditions. It's a great deal of pleasure that I signed this seal of office this 24th day of April 2017 and present this to you and say thank you so much for what you're doing, because I think there are times in everybody's life you think you've got a mental health problem. Yes. And sometimes an aspirin doesn't make it go away. Okay? Good. Got the big guns coming up here.
And once more.
Okay.
Again. All right.
Tell us a little bit about this.
Thank you so much, to Mayor and council members, for your time and just for your ongoing support of mental health issues. It affects nearly 20 to 25% of our community with a mental illness. And so we are really appreciative of the ongoing support and acknowledgement of the need for mental health care in our community. And we thank y'all for your time tonight.
Wonderful. Now tell me about the rest of
Yes,
your
I would love to. This is, I'm sorry, Rick Torreson. He's a community member. Head Frick, and he is also a youth and our community member, and he's done some really amazing advocacy work through the Pearland ISD, and we have an event coming up on May 11th, which is a suicide prevention awareness event at Turner High School, and this is Dr. Natalie Fekoch, and she's with Pearland ISD. Sophie Foran, she's a board member for Counseling Connections, Charlotte Silvera, and myself, Dawn Lawless, and we're with Counseling Connections. So
I think that's one of the things that Pastor Carson does is this next month he'll be leading us in the National Day of Prayer.
yeah,
Correct.
it's going to be great.
And I think that's part of the medicine that you need
Yes, sir.
to help with your mental illness.
Faith
Sometimes
community is
mental illness
definitely
is more of a disturbance in your process and you think you're under pressure, and
Yes, sir.
I would imagine. But mayors don't get under pressure like that.
No.
Not all.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate you for being
We're
here.
glad to be here again.
What about these guys here? Appreciate you. Thank you so much. You know, that mental health really is a serious problem in America, and we identified in various ways, and the results, we accuse people of having a mental illness problem. But these people here, I think, are working hard to make sure that we have some kind of a recognition of how we can approach and help alleviate some of the stress and strain that causes that sort of a condition in a person. It happens to all of us, I'm sure, and the idea is let's try to do something about it. And they're working on that process right now. You talk about proclamations. You sometimes think about why do you do them? You want to recognize and highlight very special occasions and special people, and I think when you do a proclamation, we don't do many proclamations. They have to rise a lot. It has, whatever the event or the occasion is, has to rise pretty high to qualify for a proclamation. And they're not frivolous in their presentation. But we have one tonight I think is very special, and it's for a longtime friend of mine, somebody I admire very strongly, and I'd like to ask her to come up here and let me showcase her. Lotta Cusinero. Good to see you. We when I did this proclamation, it's on one page. I really needed 2 pages, but I couldn't figure out how to do it all because we only have the form is sort of designed for you get your full story in and the message all on one page. But it's kind of become hard to do that with you. But what I have done is to pick some of the things that I think sort of tell a story about you, Lotta. And it goes something like this. Proclamation, Office of the Mayor, City of Pearland. Whereas Lotta Cusinero has earned her master's degree in both architecture and urban planning from Columbia University in New York, and has worked for over 25 years in community development and planning, occupations, and in the field of planning. And whereas Lotta relocated with her family and her husband Stan, you want to come up here and join this? Bask in the glory of what you can. And where Lotta relocated with her family from Connecticut in October 2003 to make Pearland their home, and was hired as the planning director to manage the city planning department. Remember that? That was a good year. And whereas Lotta was later promoted to serve as the director of community planning to oversee planning, inspection services, and permit departments to prepare for our rapid and quality growth and development that has received numerous planning awards and recognition over the years. Whereas Lotta has made presentations at Houston APA section meetings. You did a lot of those. the Urban Land Institute, served on many Houston Galveston Area Council advisory committees. And one very highlight of local is the Quality of Life Task Force for the Economic Lives of the Houston-Port region and for many other regional organizations. And whereas Lotta has tendered her resignation after serving the City of Pearland with distinction for 13 years in a demanding and complex role in building Pearland, a role in which she should be extremely proud, and plans to devote her time and talents to family and other pursuits. Keep an eye on you. Now, therefore, I, Tom Reed, by the power vested in me as the mayor of the City of Pearland, Texas, do hereby proclaim Thursday, April 24th, 2017, today, as Lotta Cisnero Day in Pearland. And I ask all family, friends, and co-workers to join with me in commending Lotta for her outstanding leadership in guiding the rapid growth and development of Pearland over the many years as Director of Community Development. And she is recognized and appreciated for her many contributions to our city, and her dedicated service to the citizens of Pearland will be long remembered. Given them, it is my great pleasure to sign this as the Mayor of Pearland, and with a great deal of misgivings, but with hope and happiness that you will enjoy your retirement. I'm going to try to make it as temporary as possible, and thank you so much. And let me give you this proclamation, and if you would join with us here. If you'd like to defend yourself, I'll give you an opportunity.
Of course. Thank you, Mayor.
Lotta, thank you so much for what you have done and what you've accomplished in Pearland. We are a different city because of you, and the planning and development of our community, it reflects your philosophy of how cities should grow. It reflects the hard work that you have put in on this particular city and projects that you've worked on and have brought to our attention and made happen. So thank you so much for what you've done, and I'll tell you, I know that, I hope that you enjoyed keeping an eye on this guy for a while, amongst other things, but I think that you'll be very busy with doing other things too. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to have you here today, because we don't get to see you very often either. So that is done, but it's a sad moment, but isn't it great to have people like this from the City of Pearland?
When you have done this for 300 times, over and over again, you forget that this is not the day to do it again. So, no. So sorry, that was a wrong opening. It's hard to shake off a habit. But let me try again. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends, fellow citizens, my co-workers, my colleagues, good evening, and I am just so humbled today. 13 years back, I didn't think I would be here, and your love, your affection, your support is just amazing. Thank you for your kind words, Mayor, and it's a real honor to get this proclamation from you. And on a serious note, though, I can't believe that I'm standing here with my retirement a few days away. It's kind of telling that I'm retiring on May, the mental health awareness. That wasn't planned. That wasn't planned. It just happened. I didn't know. But, you know, Pearland has quite a big role in my life. 13 and a half years is a long time to be in one place. My two kids grew up here, and my family and friends used to tease me that this was my third child, and indeed, that I have been a part of its growth, and I have enjoyed the successes, and I have lamented the failures, just like when your kid comes home with a bad report card, it's not a good day, so that has happened too. But I do consider it a privilege and an honor to have been part of this wonderful team, the council, administration, city staff, my colleagues, and of course the citizens and the developers who chose Pearland to build. We are grateful for them too. And together, collectively, we have seen amazing things happen. I mean, when 15 years ago, if you thought that Shadow Creek would be where it is, I mean, people would have called us crazy, but there was a plan. And so visions were created, goals were structured, and aspirations were made that started out as ideas, and that became reality. And the reason is because of the dedication of the people sitting at the podium here, the dedication of the people who called Pearland their home, and involvement of staff. We all worked together as a team. We brainstormed together, we shared our problems, celebrated our successes, and eventually established them ourselves as winners. So also I would like to take this opportunity to show my sincere gratitude to my friends, my Pearland family. They have been through ups and downs with me. Truly appreciate that. Making sure my kids got home on those Monday nights when Harish was in Galveston, and they made sure they were fed, and I love you guys. Thanks a lot. And of course, my community development team, this has been, I probably spend more time here than at home, obviously, and every day I look forward to coming to work because of you all. I know you've always had my back, and I truly enjoyed working with you guys. You probably know more about me than Harish does, so let's not share that, okay? What's happened here stays here. So. And I really would like to pay tribute to your dedication, to your commitment, your patience and professionalism. I have learned a lot when I have seen you at the counter deal with irate customers, trying to calm contractors down, trying to make presentations to the council. I have learned so much from you all, and it's really been a pleasure working with such dedicated and talented staff day in and day out. And of course, City Council, my planning and zoning commissioners, staff, the citizens, thank you for the opportunities that you offered to us. You did, let me take some liberties. Thanks for your support. And also, thank you for those happy evening meetings we had. Last Monday we were here till 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm truly going to miss that. And I hope I've forged some friendships forever. So I am looking forward to the opportunities and challenges that await me in this new journey. I'm really looking forward to the joy of not having to get agendas out on time, of deadlines, of anxious phone calls, and leisurely lunches where you don't have to rush back to somebody who's waiting, or Judy calling me saying, hey, so-and-so is waiting for a permit, at least for a while. So those are the compensations, I guess, that I get for life's transitions. And one special person I would like to thank is Judy. Been together for 10 years, we joke. She's my soulmate here, and without you, Judy, I couldn't have been the same. So from the bottom of my heart. For all you citizens here, the 100 families that decide to make Pearland their home every month, I promise you and I guarantee you that with the current leadership we have, the great City Council, this organization that will continue to prosper, you have made the right decision to come to Pearland, and I'm confident that you're not going to be disappointed. So thanks for making Pearland your home, and trusting staff and believing in us. One last thing, I have always believed in the Athenian oath, that is to transmit the city not only, not less, but greater and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us. So I have been fortunate to have this opportunity to serve the people of Pearland, and I hope that I have made a little bit of difference in the city's life. Again, I will miss you all, but in India we never say goodbye. We say till we see each other again. Good luck, and we'll see you all. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me open a regular meeting of the City Council, City of Pearland for Monday, April the 24th, year 2017. It's hard to believe that we're that far down. If you'll please rise, we'll have an invocation by Councilmember Gary Moore, and our Police Chief, Chris Dahl, will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please bow your heads with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for allowing us to gather here tonight. We ask your wisdom in making our decisions tonight. We ask that you watch over us, guide us, and give us the knowledge to know the things that we can control and the knowledge and wisdom to know the things that we can not control. We ask that you watch over each and every one of us here tonight as we go home and protect each and every one of us, especially our first responders, our men and women in the military here and abroad. We ask all this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Would you please join me in our Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. It's very rewarding to see so many of our citizens in the audience with us as we go through the process of working on issues and constructive solutions for our community. As we go through the process tonight, I'll be using the same agenda that you have, and if you'll follow it with me. In our agenda, next item number 3 is the roll call, which is required. We do have all the councilmen here except for Councilmember Reed, who is unable to attend tonight, and that the records reflect that. And it has been reflected in our minutes. Moving also, while we're still under item 3, we have in the process of our early voting for an election that takes place on May the 6th. And in the process, we also have to have candidates to make that happen. And what I'd like to do is to ask any individual in the audience who is running for office in any capacity, even governors or state senators level, if you're that level yet, to please stand and let me have you identify yourself, the position, your name and your position. Is there anyone in the audience who's there? Okay. Thank you.
I'm Terry Gregg, running for council position number 7 in the 6th seat.
That's great. Okay. Anyone else? Councilmember Moore?
Jerry Moore, running for re-election for position 3.
Okay. And I'm running for re-election as mayor, building a city, and I'm not through building it yet.
I'm David Little. I'm running for...
That information in the record? All right. Lost your place in line. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. David Little, running for City Council, position 5, where Greg Hill currently sits. Number 1 on the docket.
Okay. Okay.
Woody Owens, running for position number 7. Just go down the list, 1, 2, 3, and punch the button.
Are there any other candidates in any office? Okay. Yes, good.
I'm Greg Hill. I'm looking forward to being hopefully the first judge ever from the City of Pearland representing Missouri County and County Court of Law #1. So, yeah, hopefully next Monday.
Hey. That's why we call him judge up here. With that information in the record, let's move down to citizen comments. Are there any, do we have some city comments, any additional ones at this point? Okay, good. I do have, there are several that have submitted and they want it for specific action items, so that will come up when that action item rotates up on the agenda. We have three others that, in the order in which I received them. It's kind of a little complication here. John Cascoa? Yeah, you asked for comments on 3 and 4, so this would be a good opportunity to talk about 3 and 4. And we'll have to cover that later, but so if you would like to comment on those, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Reed, Councilman. 3 and 4 is a park bond request for MUD 21, MUD 22 for Lakes of Savannah, which is City of Pearland. My concern is as you well know, our impending concern about our fire station. And we're looking to absorb costs for that, which could range, I think Chief Riley, don't quote me on this, but I think last look, we took about $1.8 million just to improve the fire station, then an additional 1.2 per year to man the fire station with the 13 required firemen. The park bonds 3 and 4 would put us about $3.4 million into debt. That would use those allocated funds that we could otherwise use to protect ourselves against, stand up Fire Station 6. So I'm asking you to vote no for propositions 3 and 4. Help us protect ourselves. The park bond is a great idea. However, there are much more impending disasters looming. We've had roughly one fire a year for the past 3 years. And just to stand up Fire Station 6 will take an additional 2 years and about $2 million. We're looking at 2 more families at risk, and not for the sake of a park bond. I ask you. Thank you very much.
I appreciate those comments. Thank you. And we also have a request from F.T. Jones to speak on 3, 4, and 10. Mr. Jones? He did such a good job. I agree with you. It'd be hard to clean up in a bit. So thank you so much. Other submittals will be handled under the appropriate action item on the agenda as we come to that point in our quality agenda. Moving in our agenda, council agenda, item 5 is the consent agenda. Are there any items to be removed from the consent agenda, which consists of item A and D? And hearing no request to pull and discuss separately, Councilmember Carbone, would you present the consent agenda as presented?
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. Consideration and possible action, approval of consent agenda items A through D. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any discussion on those items A through D at this point? And hearing none, we do have a motion second on the floor, Mr. Secretary.
Councilmember Carbone?
Aye.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Ordinance?
Aye.
Councilmember Hill?
Aye.
Councilmember Perez?
Aye.
The consent agenda was approved 5-0 with Councilmember Reed absent from the chambers.
Okay, let's move in our agenda now to new business, which is item 6. New business item number 1, Councilmember Moore, would you present this for our consideration?
Thank you, Mayor. Consideration possible action, first reading of ordinance number 1462-2. So moved.
Second. A motion and a second. We're in discussion. Staff report.
I'll ask Mr. Coker to cover this one for us.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. This is on your agenda this evening. It's an amendment to the city's ethics ordinance, and it was a request of the council. The council's been very diligent in making sure that how the council operates and conducts business is transparent and also in a manner that basically embodies the trust that the council deserves in the relationship with the public. And so this amendment this evening to the ethics ordinance is an attempt to do that and to go a step further than what already existed. And what it does is it simply addresses not only the current ordinance addresses how council takes action in a council meeting and governs that relationship. What this does is it goes a step further and governs council interactions with staff and maintains transparency in those types of transactions as well. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, but this reflects the discussion that the council most recently had in your workshop on this matter.
Good. for those in attendance tonight, this is not the full ethics ordinance. This is a section of that relating to our council relations with city employees and staff. Having a discussion or comment on this item from council?
Yes, Mayor. I just want to make a comment about how proud I am to be a part of a council that would uniformly want to further restrict ourselves, to make ourselves more transparent, make ourselves more obviously servants of the city and its citizens, and less obviously servants of ourselves, using this position to potentially enrich ourselves or be able to have advantages that the citizens don't have. I think we've all of us who pay attention to politics, both nationally and locally, sometimes get a little miffed at the behavior of certain councils, certain elected officials. Again, I'm just extraordinarily proud to be a part of a body that would, for no reason, no reaction, no purpose, other than to make sure that we are as transparent as possible, would restrict ourselves by adding provisions to the ethical ordinance.
Well, I'd like to add, it's kind of fitting for me. It's almost come full circle since it started with my inception 6 years ago, and it's ending now on what seems to be, as Councilmember Perez said, a more restrictive ordinance, and I'm proud of it as well. And thank you, Mr. Coker, for getting it all wrapped up for us. Not only is transparency key, it also protects future council members to make sure that that they're protected as well, not just from themselves, but from, well, I guess from themselves and from doing stuff that otherwise might not be prohibitive, and it makes it clear as to what can and can't be done. As Councilmember Carbone has said, it will, in essence, put the turtle back in its shell and show some protection there. So, anyway.
I think it addresses pretty well the requirements that is sort of the relationship we have with our staff. And we want to make sure that our ethics ordinance covers that issue quite as well as we do. With the rest of the ordinance that we have, it's quite a lengthy requirement. It's all organizations should have one of these. If they don't, but the council's had this for a number of years, and we want to clarify that relationship. Any further question or comment from council? We do have motion second on the floor then. Mr. Secretary.
Councilmember Moore.
Aye.
Councilmember Ordino.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Councilmember Perez.
Aye.
Councilmember Carbone.
Aye.
Ordinance number 1462-2 was approved on its first reading, 5-0, with Councilmember Reed absent from the chamber.
Okay. Moving to item number 2, Councilman Ordino, you.
Consideration and possible action, resolution number R 2017-77. So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. We're in discussion. Staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Good evening. This is a large contract, but part of our maintenance of our sanitary sewer system. It's a sound practice to make sure that the lines are as tight as possible, that we don't have infiltration of groundwater or anything else. Such infiltration adds expense for treatment and also undermines the integrity of the piping. So we've identified some areas to go into and start this in earnest, where we've had that are feeding into the plant, where when it rains, when we get heavy rains, we notice an uptick in the volumes. And so this is trying to get out in front of that and recommend your consideration.
Okay, the council have any question or comment regarding this item? Councilman Carbone, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. When I was reviewing this agenda request, I guess one, I always look at the numbers. It shouldn't be shocking to anybody. And the funding is, some of it's coming from pay-as-you-go CIP, some of it was revenue bonds, and some of it was COs. On the agenda request, it has the funding sources where we can check different boxes. I'd like to see an additional box there for COs. I don't know if any other council would like to see that, but if you look right now, if you look at the first page of the agenda request, you have cash and bonds that are already sold. But when you dig down into it, it's also some COs that are either have been issued or will be issued. And me personally, when reviewing an agenda request, I'd like to see that a little bit more clearly shown on that agenda request in the funding section. I don't know that it's an additional onerous task to have one additional checkbox on there just so we can see where the funds are coming from, but just to remind everybody, the COs are certificates of obligation for debt that was not voter approved. So anything we can do just to bring that to light so that we can realize as a body that as we spend this money, this is debt that either has been issued or will be issued that has not been voter approved. And I'm not against this project at all. This is certainly necessary, but again, I'd like to see that more clearly outlined.
I don't have a problem with that.
I'd be okay with that.
You like it?
A couple of questions for staff regarding the engineering aspect of this. What are we doing, or how are we prioritizing? What are we using to prioritize? How are we identifying the I&I issues? And then how are we identifying what can be slip lined, what can be pipe burst, what has to be replaced completely?
Yes, sir. A little bit of history on this type of a job order contract. This methodology has been used by many cities around the state starting about 10, 12 years ago. Typically, when you start these programs, the institutional knowledge is paramount. City staff that is tenured knows the areas that are very porous. So that is a basis by which we start. A couple of years ago, we purchased a gap vac with a Jedi, which is a combo unit with a camera on the front of it. We have gone in, we have done some initial evaluations and honed these areas in a little bit. The city has done smoke testing, eliminating some of the private side issues with I&I. And that being said, we come back. We know the areas, the Berry Rose Basin, Old Town, surprisingly, has a significant amount of I&I. That is going to be our first focus. Because of the extent of the problem, the $2 million that we're proposing for the first year of the contract, because of the potential of increased capacity, meaning you plug one hole in the dike over here, it allows more water to come out of another hole. So basically, you will not see a change probably for the first 3 or 4 years of a program at this type of an expenditure level. But over time, those couple of years, you will start to see a decrease in the spikes associated with heavy rainfalls at the treatment plant, thereby improving service to the citizens, less calls for backed up sewer during peak rain events, et cetera.
So what percentage of increased flow are we witnessing?
Berry Rose right now are on a peak rain event. We're seeing 4.2, 4.3 Q, which is 4.2, 4.3 times the designed flow of the facility. And the facilities are designed typically at a 4 Q, 4 times. We elect, as opposed to having sanitary sewer overflows within the collection system, we would rather treat it at a higher rate, so we force it through the treatment plant to get treatment before it goes back out into the environment.
And just one last question, just to be sure that, at least as anybody who may ask with me, what are we using specifically to eliminate a line that can be maintained from a line that has to be removed, from something that can be done relatively inexpensively with a slip line? What criteria are we using to discover, hey, this line is completely unmaintainable and we have to go in and actually do a complete replacement?
Do the excavate and replace?
Yeah.
After we've done the preliminary research, we bring the professionals in, the consulting firm, the construction firm that we are recommending. They will go in, do an additional inspection. They will come to us with a recommendation as professionals in that type of rehab. and they will recommend to us, give us a recommendation. We will review their footage and their comments, and then move forward with, evaluate the recommended repair. We will make comment on that, and if we agree, then we will issue a task order for them to do that work.
And are we doing any kind of GIS tracking of what we've repaired so we can have a long-term inventory of what's been done and what's not been done?
Yes, we will be tracking that for inclusion in asset management when we do get that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, any other question or comment from council at this point for clarification? We do have a motion second on the floor for this item.
Councilmember Ordino.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Councilmember Perez.
Aye.
Councilmember Carbone.
Aye.
Councilmember Moore.
Aye.
Resolution 2017-77 was approved 5-0 with Councilmember Reed absent from the chambers.
Let's move to item 3 on our new business list. Councilmember Hill, would you present this for our consideration?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. Consideration, possible action, resolution number R 2017-74. So moved.
Second.
Have a motion second on the floor. Staff report.
I'll try to introduce this a little bit, and then Mr. Coker can correct anything. But these are 2 requests just for your consideration that generated from Friendswood Development, and I believe through the MUD districts. These are for the council to authorize park powers to these 2 MUD districts. Wanted to note and emphasize that my understanding is these are for reimbursing the developer for improvements that have already been made, not future enhancements as far as I am aware. Also, one of the MUDs is still controlled by the developer. The other one is resident controlled. I'll apologize, but I was not aware of that myself, and I should have asked. So one of these MUDs is actually being requested for a MUD that's controlled by the residents, and apparently they were not made aware of that when this came through the MUD. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew that. But it's really a developer request, and probably appropriate for them to make some comments or ask for the request.
Council have any question or comment at this point?
Is the developer here?
I just wanted to clarify something real quick, and I think everything that was just stated was accurate as far as I know. But I do want to just make sure the council is aware that the reason this MUD does not have park powers is because when this MUD was created, and I can't remember what year that was exactly, but when it was created, there was no such thing as park powers for MUDs. They were limited to water, sewer, and drainage facility reimbursements. And now, in order to get park powers, they would need the council's consent. And it's also my understanding that the agreement between the MUDs and the developer is if this council were to grant that consent, then the MUDs would be bound to issue debt to reimburse the developer for that. So I believe the developer is not, I'm not aware of the developers here, but I do know that, okay, I do know that also Tim Austin with Allen Boone Humphreys is here, and he represents the MUD district.
We do have representation in the audience. Any further question or comment from Carbone?
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. I guess to clarify, so this action item is for MUD 21. Is that board, I don't know who can answer this, is that board developer controlled or resident controlled?
21 is resident controlled. Yes.
Okay. So with 21 having residents on the board, has the board passed a resolution supporting this? Please come to the podium.
Thank you. I'm Tim Austin.
Give us your name and address so the tape can.
Yes, sir. I'm Tim Austin with Allen Boone Humphreys Robinson. Address is 3200 Southwest Freeway in Houston. I represent MUD 21 and 22. And let me just say that the boards of directors of the 2 districts, of course, control the districts. 21 has a full resident board of directors. MUD 22 has not yet reached that transition. The board members are property owners, but they're not residents of the board. And the question was about resolutions. There's not been a formal resolution adopted by MUD 21 or 22. We had a discussion between the boards and the developer representatives to put this issue in front of city council and act accordingly depending on how you all decided.
Okay, and so and speaking specifically to Mud 21, are there going to be any additional parks that are going to be built, or is this going to essentially allow for reimbursement on parks that have already been constructed?
The first part I can't really answer. I mean, in the future, there may be more parks, there may not be. I don't think the developer would have anything to do with them because 21 is essentially built out. So this would give the MUD the power to finance more parks in the future that might be not developer-type projects, but just parks that the people need. They wouldn't be able to do that without your consent. The proposal is that the districts would sell bonds to reimburse for existing park facilities, a considerable amount of landscaping and trails and things around detention ponds for the most part.
And that's improvements that are already on the ground?
Yes, sir.
Correct, okay. I mean, I understand, we've heard some, I think that's it for you, Mr. Ross. Questions for myself, but we've heard from some residents here that have concerns, and I think I would as well, knowing, I guess if we do nothing, then their tax rate stays the same and their burden of debt does not increase. So I don't see the benefit to them. I see the benefit to the developer, and I certainly appreciate that, but I mean, I guess I could support this if the MUD board was, had a resolution, specifically MUD 21. I really don't care what MUD 22 says because it's controlled by the developer. I'd be really interested if you felt like it was necessary to bring this before city council. I'd at least, I don't even know if your board officially knows about it. I would think if they did, they would have had some sort of motion approving that. So for me right now, I don't see how it'd be prudent for me to vote yes on this. If you want to come back with a MUD board approval, then I guess I could reconsider that. But as of right now, I can't.
I'm just going to make a brief overview of my view on the MUDs. And as I said last week when we had a MUD that wanted the road powers, I don't want to grant any additional powers to MUDs. The state is making it more difficult for annexations to take place and for these areas to be brought into the city. Additional debt's just going to bring that on, not to mention the complexity that any special district brings to property tax and the questions of that. Unfortunately, I think the state may force us into more special districts, which just makes it more difficult for a taxpayer to know where their money's going and what it's going for. So, I'm not going to be in favor of it just based off my view that, we don't need to expand those powers. I will be honest, for a developer to come back after they put it in this far and ask for that reimbursement, it takes guts. I'll give you that much. But I don't understand it personally.
Yeah, if you would please come down, because I'd like to speak to you directly. So I have the unique opportunity of having been a part of this as it was developing. I remember specifically there was in the development agreement, I believe it triggered 1,000 homes to build the fire station. Y'all got well over 1,000 homes in the development agreement and still hadn't built the fire station and fought us considerably over it not being cost effective for y'all to build the fire station. And the ultimate compromise is we got the fancy garage that's out there now. Coincidentally, we've had these individuals from that subdivision come out and talk to us about their concerns. Honestly, we have some more to talk about to it, but they don't pay city taxes. We're going to have a difficult time, or at least I personally am going to have a difficult time extending service equivalent to city limit service outside of the city limits. But that was the purpose and the intent of that component of the development agreement. I see absolutely no reason to prioritize reimbursing you for stuff you've already built, as opposed to you coming back and saying, we'd like your permission to find a way for us to get reimbursement for public infrastructure, which I don't think is allowed, but you finding a way to prioritize spending money to get them the fire station that we intended for you to build when we entered the development agreement, allowing these people to have the fire service that we thought they were going to get when we entered into the development agreement. And I'm going to have to agree with Councilman Rodno. I disagree with him with respect to mud powers. I understand that why the reimbursement is an important component to development. But you've already got it on the ground. The state's changed the rules. You already had it in your pro forma that you weren't going to get reimbursed on the parks. And now you're coming back and saying that we should reimburse you, or that these people should reimburse you. I'm just not, I'm having severe disconnect as to why we should say yes.
I appreciate that. That was a lot of questions. My name is Brian Gibson. I'm with Friendswood Development Company, 681. We moved Greens Parkway. I represent the developer. Not really sure where to start. I really don't want to address the fire issue at this point. I'm happy to answer any questions regarding that. But as far as park bonds are considered, it was always part of our pro forma. This is not just for reimbursement to the developer at this point for bonds. It opens up the potential for the MUDs to have reimbursement for park facilities in the future. That was never the intention for us only to be the ones to get the parks reimbursed. That being said, parks are something that, and park bonds are something that help beautify a community, help bring value, help bring quality of life to a community. That's something that we take pretty, seriously at Friendswood Development Company. We always have. As far as the point about the MUD districts not knowing, it's my belief that the developer board as well as the resident board did know that we were bringing it to council. The position was that we needed to bring it to council before we got approval from, a resolution from the boards. There is an agreement between the boards that, as well as with Friendswood Development Company, that the boards will work with us to help get that process worked through the city. I was very fine bringing that to council myself, and actually they asked me to do that, and I thought that was fair. So I was asked to do that, to bring it to council. We're here today telling you that it has always been part of our pro forma, as well as there's opportunities in the future, not just for this MUD, for the resident controlled MUD, BC MUD 21, but as well as BC MUD 22. I think I've asked all your questions. I apologize if I haven't. I can go on to the fire station issue if you like, but that's a totally separate issue. The agreement put together when the development occurred or began, it's my understanding the city wanted a fire station in that area. As well, we built the facility that was in the agreement. Maybe we missed it by a number of connections. I don't know exactly. I apologize for not knowing, but the fire station was built. There is, consideration where services from the fire station, and pay, fees associated with that can be adjusted every year to bring in services for whatever the fire needs are for the city or the ETJ. I believe they're just asking for, comparable services. I'm not trying to mix issues here with fire station and park bonds, but, park bonds to us are a totally separate issue as far as our fire station bonds are just completely separate.
I appreciate your point. I would say I don't disconnect them. I think it's an overall service to the entire community. If we're taking on more debt for these individuals, I want it to go to their biggest need. And their biggest need is a fire station that can be manned.
Right, and I didn't mean to, I'm just saying two separate issues I need to talk about. I didn't want to mix them together. But
no, I understand that I'm conflating them, but I think that they are conflatable. I think it's an overall service to the people out there. I wholly agree with Councilmember Carbone. I don't, unless it's the will of the citizens who live out there, to take on more debt to reimburse the developer after the MUD's already in their control. I don't see that it's something that I can approve without knowing that they've approved it.
I understand. I would say that, the will of the people enjoyed moving into Lakes of Savannah because of the park improvements, quality of life, something, trails, amenities, trees, some of that stuff wouldn't be there because it was part of our performance being reimbursed for it.
But you guys built, it's my understanding that you built Park Powers didn't exist at the time, so you must have built knowing that you weren't going to be subject to reimbursement.
Correct, but it was contemplated in the time and the agreements we have with the MUD district that we would come back. It gets pretty complicated with park bonds. Typically with park bonds, you wait until the last bonds are reimbursed because you can only get 1% of the value associated with the district. So it's not something you ask for in the beginning. It's always something you wait for in the end. And at this point, we've been reimbursed for all of our infrastructure costs and are not asking for any more of that. We've waited till the end. It's just a complicated calculation. If you start...
and I get that, the calculation, but the fact of the matter is it's not a complicated issue. I mean, the complications could be, the issue's not. And I think that while you want to separate the issue between the fire station and this park bond request, you can't, because especially now knowing that the residents are more concerned about the fire safety. I mean, they haven't been here talking about they need a new park. What they have been here talking about is they want some better response times. They want that station manned, despite what the contractual agreement was initially, that it was going to be a volunteer-based service. So if anything, I would prefer this body work with them on getting them what they want with regard to public safety concerns, not park concerns. And that's going to, well, give me one second, and that's going to cost some more money for them. They're currently already paying, I think it's $1,478 per resident, $378,000 a year coming to us. And so, they're going to have to pay more. And I would venture to say, based on what they've shown me, is that they'd rather pay more for that, not for parks. And it sounds like if we were to allow you guys to retroactively get reimbursed for parks that you built, and whether or not, we can argue all day whether or not you knew you were going to get reimbursed. But I wouldn't be inclined to do that. Furthermore, I think that the MUD rebate used to be 15 cents, now it's 10 cents. So how would that work, Darren, even if?
That doesn't apply since this is an
Okay,
ETJ
all right.
budget.
Okay, all right. So, I'm against it.
That's fine,
Yeah.
and I appreciate your position. Just one more point. Again, our position has been with the fire station. We built what was contemplated, and we built it based on same services that everybody in the city should have been getting. If adjustments needed to be made to the fees, every single year, they just should have been adjusted, based on those fees or what's needed to get, Pearland services from fire or EMS out to the community. If there's been a certain amount of services that are not the same, if Lakes of Savannah is not getting the same services the cities are getting, then that adjustment should be made every single year. I don't think that the MUD district should take on more bonds associated with fire. I think that the agreement is specific, and that that services should have been increased and fees should be increased along the years, and then we wouldn't be in this position. So I appreciate my time to let me talk today.
I hate to be argumentative, but I was in the meetings where we discussed the fire station, and we were specifically requesting something that could accommodate full service, and the developer was very adamant that that's not what they were going to build. And it was not envisioned by us. It may have been envisioned by you, but it was not envisioned by us. And again, over and over again, we're going to talk about this. These people need fire service, and we don't have a good opportunity to provide it to them. That was your obligation. That was what was in the development agreement, and that's what we, the city, that's what the city envisioned when we entered the development agreement. If we didn't want them to have fire service, we wouldn't have put a trigger in the development agreement.
Since the next item is,
Thank you for my time to talk.
yeah, ready to go to vote. I was just going to ask, would the council feel a lot better if the development of the suggested parks facilities were approved by our Parks Department? Because I think there's a lot of concern about the non-essential. So we do have motion second. Okay.
One more question for legal.
Yep.
Did I hear that the laws changed recently in terms of parks powers for MUDs?
It wasn't very recently. It's park powers were approved by the legislature several years ago, but it was after these MUDs were created. And I believe what he was representing was they didn't come forward after the legislature approved them and seek the council's consent then, because they felt like they wouldn't be able to issue any debt until they'd gotten to a certain point in development size of the MUDs. And so that's why they had not come forward yet. But the park powers have existed for a while. They just have not come to the city for consent.
Any further discussion from council?
I would be fine if the citizen-owned MUD came to us and said, here's a project that we would like to do. would you approve, the only way we can fund it is through debt. I don't want to eliminate it as a tool. I know Councilmember Carbone, or I'm sorry, Ordno would not, but I don't want to eliminate it as a tool. I don't want to say no to park debt if that's what the citizens want and they have a project associated with it. But that I can't, with the issue that they have in the fire station, I can't find a way to vote yes on this.
And if something like that ever comes up, the council can consider park powers with certain limitations built in if the council so chose to do that.
Well, and if anything, I think the timing's just not right. I mean, if the MUD board, the resident board, I agree with Councilman Carbone on that. If the resident board wanted to come back to us at some point in time, I don't see them wanting to do it now. But if they did, then maybe that could be something that we could consider. And that goes to the point about the gentleman mentioning parks and it benefits the residents. No doubt it does. But I mean, there's no plans currently, from what I heard, to build a park in the future. And so it's not ripe for discussion. If it's ripe for discussion, then you guys can come back and we can talk about it. No sense, in my opinion, now in shackling these guys with more debt. So.
Okay. But we have a motion second on the floor, Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Hill?
No.
Councilmember Perez?
No.
Councilmember Carbone?
No.
Councilmember Moore?
No.
Councilmember Ordno?
No.
Resolution 2017-74 failed 5-0 with Councilmember Reed absent from the chambers.
Moving on our agenda, item number 4, Councilmember Perez, would you present this for our consideration?
Thank you, Mayor. Consideration possible action resolution number R 2017-75. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. We're in discussion. Staff?
Yeah, Mayor, council members, I guess the concerns are the same here. This just happens to be MUD 22 seeking the city's consent in this particular instance. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, any question or comment from council at this point?
May have had one more for the developer, but I don't see him in here.
The one and the same.
If I may, there is a distinction between 21 and 22 that I think is easy to blur. 22 does have a substantial amount of park facilities yet to build because the district is only a portion of built out. And that board of directors is most assuredly in favor of this request.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate those comments. Any further comment from council at this point?
I'm just going to reiterate, I don't want to give any MUD park powers in Pearland.
Okay. Hearing none, we do have motion second on the floor, Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Perez?
No.
Councilmember Carbone?
No.
Councilmember Moore?
No.
Councilmember Ordno?
No.
Councilmember Hill?
No.
Resolution 2017-75 failed with 5-0 with Councilmember Reed absent from the chambers.
Moving in our agenda to item number 5 on our agenda. Councilmember Carbone, would you present this for our consideration?
Thank you, Mayor. Consideration and possible action, Resolution R 2017-84, a resolution renewing a unit cost contract for street and sidewalk maintenance to Brooks Concrete. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We're in discussion. Staff report.
Thank you, sir. We are doing our best with resources available to get after sidewalk gaps and replacements, existing neighborhoods. We've had a contract with Brooks, and they performed over the last 9 months, particularly as we've added resources and scrutiny to that. And we do have option for one more renewal, and asking for your consideration to do that so we can keep after at least for another year here.
Okay. Council, have any question or comment at this point? Hearing none, we have a motion second on the floor, Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Carbone?
Aye.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Ordno?
Aye.
Councilmember Hill?
Aye.
Councilmember Perez?
Aye.
Resolution 2017-84 is approved 5-0 with Councilmember Reed absent from the chambers.
Okay, moving to item 6 on our collective agendas. Councilmember Moore, back to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Consideration possible action resolution number R 2017-80. So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second on the floor. We have staff report.
Thank you, sir. We have actually four very distinct, separate, but also related contracts. All these are geared towards furthering the city's move towards an important water project, ensuring safe, potable water every day for existing and future residents. We've gone through the process and gotten TWDB monies for this, that's been in our CIP, and we're at the point now with these that we can move forward on some of the design, and I'll ask Mr. Epperson to sort of give an overview of all these, how they work together, and as we can move through each one of the four. So,
thank you, Mr. Pearson. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As Clay was saying, these next four items are all associated with our surface water treatment plant and the advancement of that project. Just real briefly, wanted to go back on the purpose of this project. The city currently has about 31.5 million gallons a day in water capacity, and that will meet our max day demand until about the year 2023, and that's when we need to have our surface water plant online to bring an additional 10 million gallons into our supply for the city. So the purpose of this project is to deliver that 10 million gallons a day of additional water capacity out of our water that we have out of the Gulf Coast Water Authority canal system. And so what we're moving forward here with is the preliminary design on the treatment system as well as the distribution into our existing system. We have three preliminary engineering contracts to award tonight, and those were broken out by the different major components of the project. And to go through that selection process, we use the statutorily required qualification-based selection process for selecting professional services. We issued a formal request for qualifications. Those were submitted by various firms, reviewed by staff, and firms were shortlisted and interviewed to go through that selection process to select the most qualified firms based on what they submitted, what they presented, and how they responded in the interview questions. You received a detailed memo on that process in February. So the four agenda requests tonight, the first one is associated with package one of the plant, which is the raw water system. It includes the canal intake and the pre-sedimentation basin as the major components of that part of the project. Freeze Nichols is the lead consultant for this portion of the project. Their scope includes a preliminary engineering report as well as 30% plans, a groundwater study, and a feasibility study on adjacent lands for possible use for additional storage and or sedimentation management. Another portion of this resolution is to allocate an additional $1.9 million into the project budget. That is TWDB bonds, which we have already actually sold the bonds, but they haven't been appropriated into the project budget yet, so we're appropriating an additional $1.9 million to cover all of the agenda items tonight. Package number two is the plant itself. The selected consultant there is CDM Smith. That will include evaluation of treatment processes, the pilot testing, as well as a preliminary engineering report and 30% plans. Package three is the distribution system, which is the ground storage tanks, the pump station, as well as the distribution lines to tie in with our existing system. Dannenbaum Engineering is the selected consultant for that portion of the project. Their scope includes 30% design on the ground storage tanks as well as the pump station, and then a route study and basically 10% route layouts on the distribution lines themselves. The fourth item on the agenda tonight associated with the project is task order number 3 with our owner's rep, Ardura, which we brought on board at the beginning of this project to supplement staff and bring that expertise in surface water development of a surface water plant. In this task order, there's continued coordination with the Water Development Board on the design so that we move all that through their processes to stay in conformance with the funding source that they provide, as well as working on the design scope and fee review for the final design packages as we move those forward. Another component of that is a full update to our water master plan. That was last fully updated in about 2007. We've had some interim updates that have guided many of our decisions on our water distribution system since then. This is a full update to that, so as we move forward with this project and other water projects, we make sure we're keeping that plan current with current design, our current growth, as well as any changes we've had in density throughout the city, that we incorporate those into that plan. And then one of the most important things is helping us coordinate the three different packages so that we've got a coherent, coordinated project overall. We'd be happy to answer any questions on any of these packages at this point.
Okay, good. There was an article just recently on the newscast about the national concern about water availability for cities and the fact that it is a dwindling resource that a lot of cities are going to have to be concerned about in the future. We've been very lucky. We have, and it's not really luck, it's future planning and making certain that we acquire the resources that we need for our growing city. We have $20 million worth of water available from the Brazos River. We have the water rights on that. And it just so happens that there is a canal called the American Canal that runs from the Brazos River down to Texas City, which was originally built back for the war effort in World War II. That canal happens to run through the southern part of Pearland, and we happen to have our regional reservoir available to us, and it's ready to use. So it's very fortunate that we're able to build a $10 million water plant to start working our issue for the future, because as we grow, we're going to need more water as we grow. So I think a bunch of positive things fell together at the same time, and we've, over the years, from forward planning and careful analysis of where we need to go and how to get there. So with that information on the table, I'll ask you, is there any question or comment from council on this item? Councilmember Perez?
Thank you, Mayor. One, I'd like to underscore the extraordinary importance of us going into a surface water plant, pulling us off of groundwater, which as a consequence of pulling water out of the ground, we take the ground that's there and it sinks. That exacerbates flooding issues along with other problems. So it's extraordinarily important that we do this investment, not only so that we're pulling ourselves away from being a customer city to the city of Houston and having to pay higher rates, but also solving the problems of science, or doing our part to solve the problems of science. One question I have for CDM Smith, if I could borrow y'all for a second.
I'm Danny Shannon with CDM Smith.
Yeah, Jason Benyer with CDM Smith.
Guys, I appreciate y'all's responsiveness to our questions. I just want to kind of take a concern that we had, that we've discussed offline, and kind of put it on, have this discussion here in open session and put a matter of record. Y'all are currently contracted to build the City of Houston's surface water treatment plant, East Side Surface Water Treatment, correct?
That's correct.
And we're not going to be sharing staff or significant resources with them.
Yeah, so Councilman Perez, we've got, for the first phase of this, we've got 47 staff members identified. Out of those 47 staff members, we've got 3 that are working on the Northeast job that are technical review specialists. So there's some of our national experts that we have on that job, and we've got 1 cost estimator. That cost estimator will have access to the latest and greatest costs out there. That'll be a benefit to Pearland. The remaining 44 that we have will be completely dedicated to this project, and there'll be no overlap.
Okay, I appreciate it. I just want to make sure that we know for certain that that our project will be of highest priority to the team that's working on it, and they don't have any other things that they're focusing on other than our project.
Absolutely. You have our guarantee on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other question?
Yes, Mayor.
Hold your position there, just in case.
This is probably more for, well, I don't know who's doing that. So my question was, what software is going to be used for updating the water master plan? Mr. Peters.
Mayor, Council, Councilman Moore, the process is that it'll probably be utilizing Bentley. We've been using Bentley throughout previous water models. So we'll be actually implementing that and continuing that upgrade since a majority of it's already populated. The benefit associated with this is that we're going to bring that model in-house. Usually we contract with our consultant, and they have the model, but we have to use them all the time. So this way, we're going to have staff that'll be trained as part of this to be able to do some of this work in-house as well.
Okay, good. That was what I was getting at. Thank you.
Yes, sir. You're welcome.
Good. Any other question or comment at this point? Hearing none, then we do have motion of second on the floor, Mr. Secretary.
Councilmember Moore.
Aye.
Councilmember Ordino.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Councilmember Perez.
Aye.
Councilmember Carbone.
Aye.
Resolution 2017-80 passes 5-0 with Councilmember Reed absent from the chambers.
Okay. Moving in our agenda item number 7, which is package 2. Councilmember Ordino, would you present this for our consideration?
Consideration and possible action, resolution number R 2017-79, so moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Council staff report. I think you gave us a good one. There's any additional comments at this point?
No, sir.
Okay.
Trent, can you just, for the record, just who it's to and the amounts so far?
Sure. So this is, again, package number 2, and this is with City of Smith to design do the preliminary design as well as the pilot testing on the treatment plant itself.
Okay. Question or comment, Councilman Carbone?
Thank you, Mayor. With this package number 2 being the largest, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe our owner's rep had, and some of the staffing there had some prior employment with this one. How do we get comfortable, or how has staff gotten comfortable with the fact that this firm's the right firm for probably one of the biggest projects that'll happen over the next 10 years?
I can speak to that, and then maybe Robert can follow that if he's got any additional comments. When we went through our qualification-based selection process, we shortlisted and interviewed 2 firms for this package. And although Ardura, as our owner's rep, helped put together the solicitation package, they did assist us with some questions during the interview process. They were not part of staff's deliberations on which firms to move forward with. After the first round of interviews, staff was essentially deadlocked on which firm to move forward with. And so the decision was made to bring them back in, present some additional questions for those firms, and basically conduct a second interview. And through the second interview process, CDM Smith came in with a much more in-depth, deep dive into the project itself, and basically showed the difference there to the staff in their commitment to the project. And it was clear, I think, from all staff involved, even those that were leaning to the other group from the first interview, we ended up with a consensus recommending the CDM staff for this particular project. And again, through those deliberations, it was city staff. It did not include anyone from the owner's rep deliberating and making those decisions.
Thank you.
Any other question or comment?
Mayor and Council, no, I don't have anything further to add other than what's been commented by both firms, and all firms actually, is that bringing a consultant back in for a second interview is not something that's been done, and most of the firms that we had said this is unheard of. So staff was very much interested in trying to keep that separation apart. And so as Trent had said, is that we are not, they were not part of the deliberations. This was fully selected by staff.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other question or comment from council? Hearing none, we'd have a motion and a second on the floor, Mr. Secretary.
Councilmember Ordino.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Councilmember Perez.
Aye.
Councilmember Carbone.
Aye.
Councilmember Moore.
Aye.
Resolution 2017-79 was approved 5-0 with Councilmember Reed absent from the chambers.
Okay. Let's move on our agenda to item 8 for package 3. Councilmember Hill, would you do the honors?
Thank you, Mayor. Consideration and possible action, resolution number R 2017-79. So moved.
Second.
Motion second, we're in discussion. Staff report on this, right? Package 3.
Just for the record, this is with package 3 with Dannenbaum, amount of $1.1,272,000. And again, as you mentioned, package 3.
Okay, any question or comment from council? Hearing none, we do have motion second on the floor, Mr. Secretary.
Aye.
Councilmember Perez.
Aye.
Councilmember Carbone.
Aye.
Councilmember Moore.
Aye.
Councilmember Ordinance.
Aye.
Resolution 2017-81 is approved 5-0 with Councilmember Reed absent from the chambers.
Okay, moving to item number 9 on our agenda. Councilmember Perez, would you do the honor?
Thank you, Mayor. Consideration, possible action, resolution R 2017-82. So moved.
Second.
Any question or comment on this item?
This is for our owner's rep extension with Ardura and the amount of $1.587,764. And just again, for the record, for anybody watching, it may seem we're going through these quickly for large amounts of monies, but there's been extensive months and months of deliberations, research, documentation for all this that the council's been made well aware of, and it's included in the packet that gets us to this point.
Okay. Council have any question or comment at this point?
Yes, I do have a comment. I just want to thank Jeff Peters and Ardura for doing a great job. Clearly, it's one of our, as Councilmember Carbone said, our biggest project we've had. And a lot of good companies, obviously, as you can tell from some of the questions up here. A lot of this stuff's already been hashed out with staff. And so thank you, staff, for your diligence on this.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. I mean, we had a lot of questions to make sure that we were making the right move, and I think Clay, Trent, Robert, all of y'all done an excellent job in making sure that we got to a level of comfort where we could vote on this and know that we're making the right decision. Thank you.
Yeah, putting together these series of packages is very important for Pearland because without water, we're not going to be able to grow properly. So it's good. Any further question or comment? Hearing none, we do have a motion second on the floor. Mr. Secretary.
Councilmember Perez.
Oh, sorry.
Councilmember Perez.
Aye.
Councilmember Carbone.
Aye.
Councilmember Moore.
Aye.
Councilmember Ordino.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Resolution 2017-82 is approved 5-0 with Councilmember Reed absent from the chambers.
Okay. Moving to item number 10 on our agenda. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You lead us on this item.
Sure. A couple months ago, council heard a report.
I
apologize.
Run through these. This will be heard at first, it's probably best. And these are in the order in which I received them. Make sure I've got them all lined up here, right? First one is Renee Medlock. Thank you for being here tonight.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. I'd like to ask everyone here on behalf of Lakes of Savannah if they would stand, please. So I have to say, first of all, I'm Renee Medlock, 14106 Spring Knoll Lane, Rosharon, Texas, Lakes of Savannah Community. I also am a director for Brazoria County MUD number 21. And I must say at this particular moment, I pretty much stand before you a bit dumbfounded because I was elected to the MUD board in May of 2016. And as soon as the issue of the fire station came up, we were told that this fire station was built the way it was. And I do specifically remember asking the question, why would we build a fire station to serve approximately 3,400 residents? Why would we build a volunteer fire station to serve that many people? And we were told that this fire station was built to the specifications of Pearland, of what Pearland was instructed. And now to hear tonight that that was not the case, but in fact it was the developer who refused to build adequate fire facilities for us, it really does leave me quite a bit dumbfounded. But at the end of the day, we still stand before you in the same situation, no matter who requested it to be the way it is. We're still in the same situation in which we have a fire station that does not meet the needs of the residents that it is meant to serve. And so in light of everything that we have heard, I want to apologize to each of you, and I know you weren't sitting in those chairs, but I must say I was a bit, as the young folks say, I was a bit salty as to how this could possibly have happened. But hearing what I heard tonight, I can digest it a bit better. But again, all jokes aside, I do stand before you again so that we can come to the table, we can have dialogue, we can find a viable solution that is going to serve the needs of the community in which I live, the two schools that are a part of those communities, Lakes of Savannah Elementary and Don Jeter Elementary, all of the families that are in Lakes of Savannah, both Lakes of Savannah South and Lakes of Savannah North. We need adequate fire protection and we need adequate EMS and a response time that is going to make those services viable for each of us. So I just ask that as somehow we're able to come to the table and we're able to have the discussion, have the dialogue, and come up with a solution for us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Thank you. I think I've got the Jeff part right. Mohammed. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Good, thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm a resident of Lakes. My name is Jeff Nur Muhammad, 14004 Savannah Landing. I've been a resident of Lakes of Savannah for 10 years now, and I just want to provide a testimonial that on my street alone, there have been 2 structural house fires, complete total loss, and now they sit empty lots. I just want to hear what resolutions or recommendations council can make on helping us improve the fire situation so that way our neighborhood doesn't end up with a bunch of empty lots. Thank you.
Good. I appreciate those comments. Thank you so much. Brian Defis. There's Brian. Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight, Brian.
Thank you, sir. My name is Brian Defis, 4815 Enchanted Springs Drive. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilman. Just wanted to make a brief statement. I live in the north side on Mud 22, and we don't have much say, as you might have heard tonight. But that fire station, it sits, and I see it all the time from my house. It's a short 5-minute walk, and it's unused. The equipment sits, collects dust, and it sits right next to a school, elementary school. And with all the equipment there and what we pay, it's just a shame and it's disheartening that we have no access to it. And that's all I have to say. Just hopefully there can be some resolution.
Appreciate your comment. Appreciate your comments. Thank you. Carla Bell Thomas. Carla Bell.
Council, if I may, I would rather respond to you until later.
Okay. Good. Thank you, ma'am. Some good preliminary comments. All right. And how about Tim Austin? There he is.
Hi, it's me again, Tim Austin.
Thank you for being here tonight, Tim.
I'll be really brief because at the training on 21, my board had asked me to help them make a formal presentation to council on this issue, and we didn't realize that there was going to be a major fire service issue on the agenda tonight, so we're not really prepared to comment, on this report. But we would like to ask council and staff to continue to speak with us and work with us on coming up with a mutually agreeable solution to the fire service issue in Savannah Lakes. I would just like to take a minute of your time, though, because of some things that have been said tonight, just to kind of set the table. And I can't address the emotions and the physical issues and the health and safety issues that have come up in Savannah Lakes that have given rise to all of these folks coming forward tonight and earlier. I can talk about the legal framework, though. And I've been involved in this district since inception. I think your city attorney was, and I'm sure the mayor was. I don't know if anyone else here was. But let me tell you that after a careful review of the agreements that I was involved in negotiating to begin with and implementing over time, MUDs 21 and 22 have scrupulously followed the terms of the agreements that were negotiated and signed by the city, the developer, and the MUDs, to the extent of building the fire station, collecting a fee from the residents of Savannah Lakes for the last 15 plus years. And the terms of the fire agreement are pretty specific. They're kind of basic, but very specific. They talk about the station. They talk about how much the station was going to cost. They talk about collecting a monthly fee, and it says that that fee will be determined based on the city's determination of what the cost for fire service in the city and all people served by the city's fire department per household, and that is the amount that the district residents would pay to the city. So with regard to fire service, MUD 21 and 22 have been and continue to pay their fair share. They don't pay a city tax, but they pay a fee instead. And it says with regard to the quality of that service, that the service will be the same standards as enjoyed by the citizens of the city. So we're not asking for anything above that. We're just asking for that. A quick scan of the study that was on your website that's on your agenda today, I think reveals that those standards are not being met. And we can give specifics and we can talk in generalities, but that's the position of the district, and I believe it's the truth. So we would look forward to working with City Council and staff to try to come up with a mutually agreeable solution to this.
Good. I appreciate those comments. Thank you. Back to staff now.
Thanks, sir. So this item is actually the final report present that we heard from Citygate. They were here and went through extensively. I believe it was on a dedicated night with maybe one other item where they presented their report. Citygate was contracted by the city to look at our current and future fire operations. Really an exhaustive report about our ability to serve now and into the future as we grow. As part of our continuing effort to look at ourselves and get the best advice possible, working alongside of our staff for getting sound plans to work ahead and make sure we're at the top of our game. The Citygate report, as you'll recall, gave us a number of maps and so forth and showed that the city fire services, despite us adding one replacement station and adding a brand new one and adding staff over the years, we're still very much stretched in terms of our city provision in the city limits and into the ETJ, which the city by tradition has provided our fire service, which was originally volunteer service, but has grown as we've matured as a city into a very professional, full-time operation. That stretching is obviously something that the fire professionals have known about and try to deal with as best possible, but really the point where we need a plan going forward where we can add facilities and stations to improve that service. One of the tables that is in the responses from our fire staff shows you a multi-year plan for adding facilities and staffing. The staffing is talked about in terms of basically a continuous recruitment process. We had to ramp up very quickly over the last couple of years since I've been with you all to add a big chunks of staff. That was a challenge in a lot of different ways, and one of the things we're going to be looking to do is to add increments of staff pretty much continuously every 3 months, bring in new rounds of people so we can train them, integrate them into our operations. So that's part of the plan. And then also the facilities. in the CIP that you'll be seeing that we're sharing to the P&Z in a couple months. We're going to advance some of the design so we can look at facilities and get the plans on the book. So we have facilities that are recommended. Station, I guess it's 6, off on Shadow Creek Parkway, 8, I'm sorry, 8. And then another one over in the southeast part along Bailey Road corridor. Want to get those designed and then look towards adding those over time. So those are some of the big, visible, as the study says, trying to get us some more weight that we can bring into different situations. But the fact is that it's not going to change. The city is very geographically large. The roads, despite, what we have done and have coming, it's difficult even for emergency services at points to move through those. So we just need to get more weight that we can move around and provide our essential services. As I mentioned briefly, the fire department staff have provided a detailed counterpoint or supplement to all the recommendations that were found in the City Gate study. And as you see by reading that, by and large, our own staff agrees with 95% of those recommendations and look forward to recommending moving forward on those. And in fact, one of those we'd like at least some concurrence to move forward to. We have a part-time position that's open, and we'd like to convert that to a full-time business manager. We've already seen some success on that on the police side. So we've got budget salary savings in this year, and we'd like to recruit for that and get going on that. Another thing that was included there is service to the southwest portion. We do have Station 6, which was built as a part-time when we are a volunteer operation that has, despite best efforts or recruitment, we've not been able to get people to fill those as, might have been the case 10 years ago when that agreement was envisioned. And so if there's concurrence as well there, we'd enjoy the opportunity to continue our dialogue with the HOA and the MUD, whomever, and present the options that we shared there of adding some staff in the next fiscal year where we could have at least 2 people that would be at that station and could respond when they're there to, at least as a first responder into that southwest area. They would be available citywide, and they'd be obviously continue to be, they'd be a part of our operation and they'd move about, but at least they'd be basing out of that area. So we would, assuming that meets with your agreement tonight and makes sense, we'd go to those MUD and HOA boards, and Chief Riley and his team would talk to them about that and any other ideas that might come up. So sort of a high level, middle level, I guess, that's the report. And if there's any questions about the final report or any of those specifics, I'd be ready to answer those now. So Chief, maybe you can wander up here and help me out too.
Thank you. Mr. Pearson provided a very good broad overview, and I'd be happy to answer any specific questions you may have.
Let me rotate through the council, starting with Councilor Perez.
Thank you, Mayor. Obviously, what we're talking about is the overall city fire coverage, but kind of a matter that's come to a head a little bit is what we're doing in Lake Savannah. To those citizens, I would just say the unfortunate part is you're outside of the city limits. We were invited into the development process by the developer. They entered into a development agreement. Typically inside the or in the ETJ, our powers are limited, usually just to approving plats. But the owner asked, or the developer asked us to participate, and it gave them some benefit, particularly on the insurance side. It helps y'all with having lower insurance rates because we've reviewed the plans, we inspect it. That gives you points to your insurance score. Other than that, we would have no ability to require them to build a fire station, but we did put it in there. To the attorney's point, they were very scrupulous about how they adhered to the development agreement provisions. There was a cost provision in there for the fire station. I think it was in retrospect, and I think we had much admitted this when we were talking to them at the time, we shouldn't have had a cost provision. Should have had a level of service provision. When that was initially put in there, they said afterwards, when we were, at least in the meetings that I attended, the quarterly meetings that are required to have with us, they said, well, the cost of the fire station just went up significantly. We can't build what we plan to build. I'm not sure what was communicated to y'all. It was of interest to us to get y'all a fire station that was a little bit better than what you have. The difficulty for us is we cannot provide you fire service equivalent to what taxpayers pay inside the city limits. But we are happy to work with you to find a provision where if you're willing to pay for it, or at least let me say this, I'm willing to, as a council member, willing to entertain a conversation where if y'all are willing to contribute more than what you're contributing, enough to build the fire station and staff it, we'll find something, will help. At least that's my hope. The developer left. I would have liked to have asked him if he would be willing to renegotiate some components of the developer's agreement, and we could help him a little bit more on the park fund if he'll, give a little bit on the fire station. But unfortunately, he's left before we had that opportunity. So perhaps we can entertain that. But it is not for lack of desire to serve y'all. It's just I personally cannot feel fair to the people who pay city taxes, particularly for those services, to be able to provide those services equivalent to what they're paying for to people who aren't paying city taxes. I absolutely 100% empathize with y'all's situation. We'll work with you. I want to work with you in whatever way we can. To the overall fire service, I think, Riley, I think you do a great job. I have a couple of questions.
Thank you.
One, I think I'm okay with the service manager position. I don't have any objection to that. My only, and I think I know the answer to this, but just so I feel, at least so I feel comfortable that I asked, the Massey Ranch, if that gets approved, that's a large development on the south side of town. We don't really have fire service there. Does the plan already incorporate that development coming in? Do we need to make any amendments to our plan and reprioritize if and when that project comes in? And is there, for that project and other projects, are we going to have a regularly scheduled amendment to this plan so we can keep track of what have we done, what do we need to do, what's changed, what assumptions are good, what assumptions are bad?
I will try to address all your questions. This staffing study, the plan, I believe, is on page 19, does not address the Massey Oaks, is that the correct terminology? Massey Ranch area. It does not address the airport area. So if there's development in those areas, it will require an additional fire station. Obviously, that's something we have to keep an eye on, and we'll have to modify our plans as we go through. But the plan that's being submitted does not include any additional protection in those areas.
Okay.
Okay, first, before I address the Lakes of Savannah issue, just real quick, explain to me, tell me a little bit more about this business manager position. How would that work from a fire standpoint?
As our department has grown, we have an administration division that handles purchase orders, hiring, all of the administrative and finance functions of the department, and it's just a tremendous burden right now, and so we need that additional position. It's converting an existing position from part-time to full-time to take on more of those tasks.
Okay. And I think it's a great idea. I particularly like how we can just rework the classification to make it happen and save on cost. What about, can you speak to the possibility of using in the future SUVs, smaller SUVs, to roll those out for EMT responses fully equipped as opposed to rolling out these ladder trucks which affect infrastructure, not just on the truck, but on the roads and everything else? Are we looking to hopefully transition to that?
We don't have enough resources now to be able to deploy the SUV program.
Right.
So yes, when we have the resources, then that's something we can look into. We asked Citygate to look at basically outside the box, and we don't have enough in the box to get outside the box. So, but yes, ultimately, that is our goal for that reason.
Even if we just had a few, it would seem to be a start. But I mean, is that something you guys contemplated or discussed with them, with Citygate?
Yes, but we don't, they have to be paired with ladder trucks, and we don't have the ladder trucks right now.
All right. Well, okay, on Lakes of Savannah, you know, keep in mind, at one point, Pearland was a volunteer-based service, but I'll tell you this, we don't need the developer, in my opinion, and I'm quite frankly glad he left if he felt the need to leave. But the packet, as you look at it, there's some suggestion that we look to possibly try to fit a two-person first response unit to respond to that section 24/7. So that would be better than nothing. And so I think that we've got some plans, and it's my understanding, based on what I've read, that we've got the authority to adjust the agreement that's currently in place, but probably best with, you know, y'all's consultation and input. And I think that it's right. I think, is it Renee? One that was talking about being salty? Yeah. No, I'm going to use that with my wife. I'm going to tell you that. Okay? I know she's not watching because she doesn't watch this, so I'm going to use that tonight. I'm going to tell her, don't be salty with me. Yeah, I think that Renee's right. I think we need to work together, and we will. And it's all there is to it. I mean, it's just simple. We'll just get it done. Just all there is to it. So that's that. Let me just real quick though, the fee, the mention from the MUD attorney, or I'm sorry, sir, I don't remember your name, but the initial fee at the outset, and I had said it earlier, I can't remember if I'm right on the numbers. I think it's like $14.78. What is it, $14.84? There you go. So I couldn't remember, but I thought that the fee, and Darren, maybe I thought that the fee to some extent was a reimbursement on equipment, just as much as it was service. It was, I could be off.
Just to clarify, first of all, Tim and I have spoken here recently, and while there's a lot of agreement on things that can and maybe should be done to enhance service in the area, on how you get there, we may have some disagreement about the terms of the agreement. Specifically, what it says is the agreement allows the city to recapture its actual costs. The disagreement that we will end up having to work through is he believes the agreement takes that number, the actual cost, and divides it amongst the city, all the individual residential connections of the city. My interpretation of the agreement is contrary to that, and that you divide that number, the actual cost, amongst the residents in the MUD that are receiving that service based on the agreement. So we have that disagreement. We can work through that. I've worked with Tim a long time. He's a very easy person to work with, and so I think there's a lot of common ground that we can work on.
Okay. Well, and Councilman Perez brings up a point which is valid. We talked about it at a council retreat, not with regard to Lakes of Savannah, but with regards to MUDs 2, 3, and 6, and that is there's fire protection being provided to some of these other folks that are in our ETJ, and they're paying far less than what you guys are. And so we've gone back to the county to get them to pay more, and we're constantly working on that, and we'll constantly be working on that. But it's not entirely applicable with regard to the concern that you, as a non-tax-paying entity, or citizens rather, are not paying your fair share. Clearly, if we can't provide city services down outside of the city because you're not paying taxes. It just wouldn't make sense. We don't provide fire protection in MUDs, police protection in MUDs 2, 3, and 6. Pearland PD doesn't roll out there because it's not within the city limits. That's the sheriff's department, and they pay for that. And that's where you guys lie. It's not an issue, I think, with regard to, well, it's not fair because you're not paying taxes. Well, but that's not applicable here because you are paying for this service. The question is whether or not you're paying enough. And that's where I think we can work something out. So I don't think if any residents in Pearland come to approach Councilman Perez or anyone else up here and say, well, look, it's not fair that you're paying or you're providing fire service to Lakes of Savannah. Well, that's wrong. It is fair because they're paying for that service. And soon, when we work it out, they'll be paying a little bit more and it'll work out. So I think that's a non-issue, and I hope this body didn't get caught up in that because I don't think it's applicable.
I'll start off with the Lakes of Savannah. I am glad there is some cost sharing already, and to bring it to the next level, I hope we can sit down and come up with what that increase in cost sharing has to be. I think it is unfortunate that when the city moved from volunteer to full-time, we didn't look at this, and I'm not sure why that happened. We've had a lot of changes since we've made that change. So, Chief Riley, thank you for the memo. I agree with what's in the memo, and I'll wait to hear from Mud 21 and on what their thoughts are. With the overall, we've talked about some developments. We've talked about the Massey development and a couple of other ones. I assume that when this study was done, they looked at current zoning and assumed any development would be developed as is zoned today. The problem is we have a ton of RE, half-acre lots that just, we're not going to develop those as half-acre lots. I don't think overall density will even get us there. From what I've learned, I think that was basically council at the time playing with some numbers to get us to an overall density in the city that we wanted, and we're going to throw RE on a bunch of properties, and oh, good, we have the number we want. Could we look and try to figure out what that number might be? And I know that's like me spinning around 20 times in this chair and throwing a dart, and everybody better duck. But because there's a lot of things that'll play in. But what we're seeing at Massey is an area that is predominantly zoned RE coming back to a density of R3, R4. That's a huge difference. Not only for fire, but PD, for water. I mean, for almost every plan we have out there. So I would ask staff to look at that and see what that effect is, what we can do to figure out what that effect is, I guess, is kind of what I'm looking for. But thank you for the study. It's like everything else. We'll get into it when we get into the budget and figure out what we can afford and what we can't afford. Because at the end of the day, that's where the rubber meets the road is what can we fund and where do those funds come from. So thank you.
Thank you. May I ask a clarifying question? So what you're asking us to do is give you a ballpark how density affects demand for fire and EMS services?
Yes, with the caveat of in the areas that are undeveloped and I don't think will ever be developed as they're zoned, and RE is really that area. I mean, half-acre lots. The one by Massey, that's almost 1,500 acres of half-acre lots. I wish we could develop that. That would help everybody's tax base here, but the idea of having that many large, 400,000 to, multi-million-dollar homes develop in Pearland, I don't know if I'll live long enough to see it. So that's kind of the area that I'd like for staff to look at. And, I guess off the top of my head, I'm thinking R3, R2. I wish I could say R1, because honestly, that's where I'd like to see that RE rezoned to, is that R1 to R2 density. But it appears we're going to approve something that's closer to R3, R4 density. So I guess R3 is kind of the happy median.
Okay, I think we can provide that to you looking at our existing data in the current zones across the city. They're similar.
I think we recognize that the Lexus Savannah will eventually be a part of Pearland annexed into it, but it's a little way off at this point, obviously. But I think that when it gets there, we'd like to have all the houses are still there first. So I think maybe if we could work out some kind of an agreement with them. I know it's supposed to be covered by the regional district and the county. I can't remember what the name of that fire district is down in that area. But it's a big footprint, so I understand that. Councilmember Moore?
Thank you, Mayor. So I don't know, maybe I missed it because there was a lot of information that came from down this end. So being one of the latter ones to speak. So do we have some kind of program that we're going to follow and update yearly, or as a development is built, so that we can look and see what kind of fire protection we're going to need to provide, and are we going to need another fire station, and try to get ahead of that game a little quicker? Because I feel like right now we're playing a lot of catch up, and we're talking about building 3 fire stations, and we need them like today.
There's a lot of different options. We can have this firm come in every 2 years and do an update probably for minimal cost, or we can, we got a lot of data in here and we understand how they derive some of their conclusions, so we may be able to do a lot of it in-house, which obviously is preferred. So certainly updating this plan every 2 years or even annually, we will annually take a look at this plan and see where we're at. But again, the undeveloped areas, we know that there's going to have to be a station in each of those. When it is and what it's going to need to be capable of doing is really the issue.
Okay, yeah, because, I mean, some of our areas now don't quite meet the overlap requirement that came out of the study. And, you know, this is existing structures already. This isn't something that we built last year. So I just have a little concern with that on how we're going to keep up with that, because every 6 months, Pearland is not the same as it was 6 months ago. So, I mean, that's how quick it's changing, and we struggle trying to keep up with that fast growth. But I just would like to have something where we look at this a lot more frequently, so that we are a little bit more ahead of the game. And of course, the ETJ areas, that's always going to be a little laggard there, because we don't know, how it's going to end up developing. But if we could do that, I would feel a lot more comfortable, because police, fire, safety is among the top priorities to provide safety to all residents. But with that note, I do think we can come to some kind of resolution with Lakes of Savannah pretty easily. It's really a cost issue, so I'm willing to sit at the table and discuss that.
And more, if I could, to the updates, as the Chief mentioned, there's sort of the recommendations that we reported, and we'll share back with you about progress on those specific. But then also there's the overall plan. As you mentioned, it feels like we've done a lot of work, and we're still a little behind from where we want to be. One good thing is, at least with the Massey specific, is the timeframes I've heard is, at least for the property acquisitions and so forth for utilities and the roads, that's a year process perhaps. So we got a little bit of time to map that out, and I think we probably want to wait for a more exhaustive dive with Citygate until we got closer to that, because then what the other roads are, what the rest of the development's like, maybe how some of these other things affect. It'll be more relevant and current report at that time, I think.
And if I just tag on to that, in your packet you have a 5+ year plan, and that's obviously not in concrete. That's something that we can adjust and look at as we move along. It's designed to be flexible from the start.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I mean, to follow up on that, you've got 5+ years of work to do right here for houses that are on the ground and built. So I understand we want to look out further, but I'd rather focus resources on action we can do right now, because we know there's going to need to be another fire station down south, and I don't want a consultant to tell us exactly where to put it until we've got the other 3 built that we already know we have to have based on current response times. On the overall study and the responses, I certainly appreciate all the time, and I like the recommendation by recommendation response. I agree with everything. A couple of them, number 17, the full set of PPE for each firefighter. I think that's imperative. I hope we can find room in this coming budget year. I mean, that's the gear that's going to keep our men and women safe and healthy over the long run. So I'd like to see that happen. I like the way we're phasing in 3 additional firefighters every 90 days. I mean, we're here during the budgets the past few years trying to get staffed up for all these additional stations, and it's rough. So bringing them on every 90 days, I think makes a lot of sense. If you wouldn't mind, since we've got a lot of residents here from Lakes of Savannah right now, could you give us just a few-minute overview of kind of your plan? Because you've got a memo dated April 11th that lays it out pretty good. So I guess if you could give us an overview and then kind of what the next steps are, if we can come to some sort of consensus tonight, so we can get this wrapped into our next budget cycle.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Lakes of Savannah has reached out to me. I think I've been to 2 of their meetings. They indicated that if we had a plan, they may be interested in seeing their monthly rates go up, which is right now currently, I believe it's $14.84, about 49 cents a day. And we have a vehicle that holds 2 people. It holds water, foam, firefighting equipment. We can spend a little extra money and outfit it with defibrillators and the medical equipment, and we can put a paramedic firefighter and an EMT firefighter on that unit 24/7, 365 to be housed at that station. There's only 2 rooms for them to sleep in, so at this point, it's a stopgap measure. Is it perfect and ideal? Absolutely not. Is it much better than waiting 12, 14 minutes for somebody to get there? Absolutely. This unit will not be restricted to that area, just like all the other stations that we have in units in the city. They will go wherever they're needed to help out. But we believe increasing to about $30 a month as opposed to $14.84 will be enough to pay for that staff to be there around the clock. So there's no need to purchase an additional vehicle. We do have some additional equipment we would need to put on there. And, of course, hire 6 more people.
And I think that's great. I was excited to see the response come out so quick. I think from my standpoint, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know how we can communicate this to the MUD officially and get that kind of negotiation process going, but whatever we can, I'm in favor of getting that moving so that we can get that truck, because I mean that's going to put somebody 24/7 right there.
Yes.
And I think that's what they've been asking for. Now I get it's not a full pumper or full ladder, but at the end of the day, if we can get somebody there to save a life, whether it be a medical emergency or get folks out of a house burning, you know, it sucks to lose a house, but as long as we don't lose lives and we can get the first people there, that's what I'm mainly concerned about right now. Like you're saying, stopgap till we can get something more permanent. So I don't know, maybe that's a question for legal. How can we make this happen for this next upcoming budget cycle?
Don't know that you'll come to a consensus tonight on that, but I think the next steps would be for staff to receive direction from the council this evening, then we can sit down and work with the MUD districts and try to reach a solution that we can bring back to council for consideration.
Mr. Mayor, and I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, that's Chief mentioned. He's been met with the MUDs a couple of times. We're kind of waiting until tonight. The proposal memo that outlines that is in the packet, so it's out there. But I haven't heard any concerns or objections from council. We'll reach out and set that up and start that conversation and lay out the numbers and go from there and report back. So we would ideally want to have a consensus that where this is the direction we're headed, and even frankly be ready to start recruiting and doing some things pre-October 1. So.
Okay. Well, I'm in favor, and I haven't heard any council object.
I'd be in favor.
No, I'm in favor of looking at it, and I mean, if the cost doesn't increase to the city, I'm good.
And I guess what I like about that is back to Councilman Hill's question about the SUVs. I mean, this is a 2-man truck that could respond a little bit quicker, and I guess in my mind a little bit more cost effectively. So whether we end up rolling them out throughout the city, at least this maybe gives us some experience with running a 2-man truck.
Yes, and to clarify, this is actually what we call a mini pumper or a small rescue truck, so it's bigger than a Tahoe or a Suburban.
Okay, back to the staff on this. Yes.
Just for my edification, Darren, because I would be in favor of that provision. I think it's a good compromise. What would it look like on Lakes of Savannah's end to be agreed with us about implementing the additional fee? Is that just, does the MUD have to approve it and then it is enforceable to MUD 21? Does MUD 22 and MUD 21 both have to agree on it? What is it that Lakes of Savannah needs to do to accept that proposal?
currently we have a fire services agreement in place, and it's that agreement that outlines the terms. And whenever I mentioned earlier that there are some disagreement about at least one element of that, that's the agreement I was referring to. And so while I think the city's contention would be that, yes, we can recover our actual cost and do so, our hopes was to sit and work with the districts to make sure they're comfortable with what we're proposing. I do know for a fact, though, that they would disagree. I think they would think that would need some type of amendment to the agreement. I don't believe that would be the case, but that's something we can work through when we have our meetings with them.
Okay. Hey,
if council's comfortable, maybe a motion would be appropriate to accept the final city gate report. Just so there's that, and that's the more global citywide plus ETJ coverage, and recognize that. And we're going to get after tomorrow morning on the recommendations and the set up that meeting with the MUDs, and haven't heard any. We'd like to move forward that conversion, that part-time to the business manager, since we've got that open, so we don't have to wait around for that too.
I would probably recommend a formal action probably take place at a different meeting, just simply because the way it's posted on the agenda was council input and discussion.
Apologize.
So we can always, if that's something the council wants on a future agenda to take into the record with an official resolution or something, that could be considered as well.
Would that need to have specific language to say that we are in agreement for the service manager?
Or whatever. It doesn't have to, but if that's something the council would like to do, obviously you could do that.
I guess one last comment. Chief, do you need any other direction from us with this study? I know there's a lot of information here to digest, and we hit on a couple of hot topics. Is there anything else that you need direction from us?
No, sir, not at this time. This I wanted to, again, emphasize in closing that the plan that we submitted, the 3 firefighters every 90 days, is obviously budget dependent, but it's a huge task, and it's just kind of a best way to roll smoothly through increasing over the next several years.
And just to clarify, that's paid, right?
Yes, full time, yes.
Yeah.
Chief, maybe one larger thing that's referenced in here, maybe in passing, we haven't really dove into, is we have been struggling with mandatory overtime. We staffed up, and we'll probably be bringing you some background on that next month or two for recommendation for hiring additional full-time. There'll be a separate item, but it's a large, budget item. We think it's going to reduce wear and tear on our firefighters and be, I don't want to say cost neutral, but offset somewhat from some of the mandatory overtime. But it's referenced in glance here, and since we're going to bring that back to you sooner rather than later, I wanted to just note that. Thank you.
Okay. Chief, I think that we were moving a little bit better clarification of the issue. And council concurrence, I'd like to move to item number 11 on our agenda.
Thank you.
And thank you for your good work on that. We do have a citizen who would like to speak, John Despain. And then I'll kick it back to you, please.
Would it be appropriate to ask if I speak after the presentation stage, because I'd like to know what's in it first?
Okay. We can do that. Clay, would you present item number 11 for us?
Sure. One of the things from our February early budget input was the take-home car provisions. This was noted in Berkshire. We've discussed it a few different times. I'll say that, and also council dealt with it a year ago, February, where we said we believed in the take-home car program, but we wanted to move towards, rather than anywhere in the metro area where the city was providing that wanted to bring that into city limits. And over time, it's been described ad nauseum about how that was being approached. Bottom line, where we're at today, Berkshire made some recommendations, and police administration believes that we can benefit from having that take-home car program for marked and unmarked, in the city limits and in the ETJ for officers that live in the ETJ that meet the other requirements, et cetera, et cetera. We collectively do agree that the program has benefit for our neighborhoods and for operations as described in the memorandum. So where we're at tonight, and Captain Randall's our resident expert, just to bring up speed, we've got options that if we could, as in the spirit of the early budget input, if we could get some discussion and or consensus, that'll help us in building next year's budget. But at least from the staff side, we'd like to expand the program as is noted there and bring that into the ETJ officers as well as the city limits. So Captain Randall can maybe run through some of those numbers for you just so we're all on the same page. I know you've seen this, but he can describe that.
Okay.
Will this one take over, Trent? It's a good thing Dan's here. Council, good evening. So you've hopefully had a chance to read the memorandum. It's pretty much what you read back in last February, and it is essentially what our response was to the recommendations made by Berkshire in their report. Just as a reminder, Berkshire advisors, their suggestion to us was that we needed to change our take-home car program, and what they wanted us to do was basically look at police cars that were going home, only permit marked units to go to officers' residences and only within the city limits of Pearland. We felt that there was additional benefit to police cars that were, whether they were marked or unmarked, going home, not just within the city limits, but within the ETJ, with the understanding that many of those areas are likely to be annexed at some point, and that if there can be a residual benefit of making those to be nice communities prior to us taking them over, that there was a benefit there for the city. The major change is, I'm going to go ahead and kind of move to here. One of the questions that has come up in the past was that in January of 2016, we discussed the patrol take-home fleet program. And the decision that was made, I felt collectively by council, was input, which was to begin to look at those cars within the patrol home fleet program that were outside of the city limits of Pearland, starting to be taken home or taken in 2 per year every October with the beginning of the fiscal year. So where we are on that today is that of the 35 cars that we were told to maintain, there are 26 of those that go to locations within the city, 3 into the ETJ, and there are still 6 left outside the city. What we did not discuss on that day were the other vehicles that are assigned to officers, either via their position or rank within the department. However, that was brought up by Berkshire, and therefore our response took that into consideration. Without reading the entire table to you, if you end up having any questions about those numbers, I'd be glad to explain them. The next slide being the supplemental vehicles needed by the program. This is only those marked vehicles within the actual take-home fleet program. Regardless of whether this program changes or not, we are anticipating that we are going to need 4 new vehicles beyond those that are replacements and beyond those that you provide to us for personnel. We have, as you know, had numerous openings for the last couple years, and if those openings are filled, we simply do not have enough cars to run the program as it's been dictated to us. If you were to adopt Berkshire's recommendation, there would be 6 vehicles needed. The police department's recommendation would require a total of 8 vehicles. So
The difference between the police department's recommendation and the current plan is 4 vehicles. The cost that we are expecting for our PD fleet this next year is here on this next slide, or this next table in your handouts. And essentially down there at the bottom, you can see what each of these plans would cost. The cheapest plan is the actual current program. However, that plan also has the least number of vehicles within the city limits of Pearland. One of the major changes to the program as we are proposing it is that there are 31 officers who currently take home cars that live outside of the ETJ that would no longer be permitted to do so. However, there are 17 officers that currently live within the city and ETJ that do not get to take home cars that would get cars under the program changes. All 17 of those would actually be marked units. And while it's probably going to be, just about impossible to see on this, the little red dots indicate where cars would be additionally dispersed throughout the city under the take-home program. The blue dots are the existing vehicles. You'll notice, of course, that the blue dots are more heavily concentrated on the east side of the city, which of course kind of makes sense because most of the newer development has occurred on the west side of the city. Under the current program, it is very much based on seniority and assignments, and generally the officers that are in those are the officers that are more senior within the department. And of course, a lot of those officers are longtime residents here of the city. With that as a preface, I'd be happy to answer any questions that y'all have.
Carbone?
We're ready to.
Oh, okay. John, come on down. I wasn't sure whether you were talking or not. Thank you for being here tonight, John.
Do you want me to give you my home address or my PD address, since that is my second home? John Despain. I represent the Pearland Police Officers Association, and I represent the men and women of the Pearland Police Department. I'm a little confused a little bit. I understand Berkshire, we're here because of Berkshire and everything, but council has already set the guidelines. They come up with a good program that was just said is the most cost-effective and beneficial. So why are we having this discussion again? What I urge, and well, for those who don't know, there's always been a distinction between the take-home fleet program and the assigned fleet program. The assigned fleet program are supervisors, narcotics, warrant officers, school resource officers, crime scene, detectives, internal affairs, community services, motorcycles, and so on. The rest are marked patrol vehicles. And for years, that has been always the discussion is the take-home fleet, the marked patrol cars. What we, the Police Officers Association, recommend, keep the program as is. It's working. Don't fix it. I mean, don't fix it if it ain't broke. Just keep it working, or keep the program as is. Because one of the parts that I do agree with Berkshire, where it says increased response times to critical incidents. And in the response, it also says that also applies to the unmarked vehicles. Well, if I'm sitting there on a crime scene and I'm waiting for my backup officer or my backup detectives to arrive, and the citizens are going, why are we having to wait? I say, well, ma'am, the officer had to drive to the police department, pick up his city ride before he can drive out here to the scene. That's not very cost effective. That's not very citizen oriented, and it gives a bad reputation. When detectives get called out, and I can speak for this specifically, when detectives get called out and I need additional detectives, I can call somebody up and say, go straight to the scene, go straight to the hospital at Texas Medical Center. If the plan is adopted to where the assigned fleet and the take-home fleet is merged, that would stop most of that. So then the people would have to drive to the station, pick up the vehicle, drive to the scene wherever they may be, drive back to the station when they're done to drop off that vehicle and then drive home. It doesn't sound very cost effective. So I'm going to leave it at that. I would refer y'all to page 16 though, where in the last paragraph it says, should council choose. And then it ends, absent any further direction, the PD will continue as the current policy dictates. That's what I would recommend. Thank you very much.
Good. Appreciate those comments.
Mr. Mayor, it might be helpful for this discussion, Captain Randall, from what I think we're talking about trying to expand from what the current program is. Can you just describe that a little bit?
Well, the expansion would be within the ETJ. So currently, like I kind of said earlier, you would actually have more cars within the ETJ, but less cars going out overall. The difference there being, however, that 31 of those cars that are coming back in or part coming back in or not going home anymore are cars that are all going outside the city. 17 cars, however, are now within the ETJ. So the expansion that Mr. Pearson is referring to is the expansion of the number of cars within the actual ETJ.
Good. Councilmember Carbone, we'll start with you.
All right, I'll give it a shot. So help me get my head around assigned fleet versus take-home fleet. Because I know that was a big eye-opener to me in the past and I guess I don't want to answer the question I just asked. Let me shut up.
Yes, sir. So interestingly enough, within the city's policy, there is no actual distinction. There's actually nothing that's in writing that distinguishes the assigned vehicle or the vehicles that we have put into the assigned part of the fleet versus those vehicles that are in the patrol take-home part of the fleet. The patrol take-home part of the fleet, however, is actually defined in our city policy. I'm sorry I don't have it up, but it's 3.07 if anybody wants to pull it up. The supervisors, for example, I've been here almost 20 years, and as long as I can remember, if we were going to hire a sergeant, we bought a car for that sergeant to take home. However, interestingly, again, it's not actually in writing anywhere. In January of 2016, when I went before y'all, I was asked to speak about the patrol take-home fleet program because that's what the question was about, and that's why the conversation was very narrow to that. Berkshire, however, really opened up the conversation regarding the entire police take-home fleet. So the assigned vehicles, essentially you've got your officers that are assigned patrol. These are the officers that are going out generally answering your citizen calls for service on a daily basis. Those are the officers showing up at most car wrecks, so on and so forth. The assigned fleet are officers who have special assignments within the department and normally specialized duties that go outside of general police work. John gave some good examples, warrant officer, motorcycle officers, so on and so forth. Those vehicles, or at least most of those vehicles, really can't be shared. So for example, the new vehicles that were just purchased for the community outreach division, they don't have cameras, they don't have radars, that kind of thing. All of the SROs work the same hours. So we can't really take the SRO's assigned car and have it shared with patrol. So does that kind of answer your question?
It does, but well, yes, it does. So when we look at the assigned fleet, it's not that vehicle will be used and that vehicle will be out on the street. It's literally, it's parked on Cullen, and that is somebody's vehicle, so they're going to drive their personal vehicle to the station, swap vehicles, and then go out on a call?
Yes, sir. So if you were somebody that had an assigned vehicle and you lived outside the ETJ, you would come to the police station, pick up your car, and then go to work. The savings there is really if you're looking at a cost savings or asking about a cost savings, that cost savings is there in essentially what's your mileage rate. I did not run new mileage rates this year. I don't expect that they would be more than 1 or 2 cents off from last year. The marked units, now this excludes the new community outreach vehicles because they're the first ones that we have like that, but runs about 84 cents per mile. And the vehicles that are unmarked vehicles run about 57 cents per mile. And the reason that they're cheaper is that essentially they, in general, have better gas mileage, less wear and tear on the brakes and tires, and the cost of the car is cheaper. So your per mileage cost is cheaper.
So with that definition, the assigned fleet, I guess, help me bring that into the discussion tonight. And are we talking, I assume we're talking about revamping the assigned fleet as well as the take-home fleet?
Well, you know, obviously, after the Berkshire report, they talked about everything, and we were asked to respond to that. And so this was our response to that. The police department's administration did get together. We looked at the arguments that were made by Berkshire and looked at, did we obviously first off agree with it, which we did not. We felt that it was much too restrictive. And of course, we came out with a little bit of an expansion from what Berkshire was recommending.
So when we look at this police department recommendation column, that is for assigned vehicles, that's keeping it consistent with how we've done it in the past?
No, sir. So that would be a change.
Okay. I guess, so why the change? I mean, because I get back to, it's going to be parked at the station or somebody's going to take it home. It's not going to be used. Why the change?
Essentially, I would probably say that the best answer to that is that Berkshire's report really made us evaluate what we were doing. And again, I'm sorry, I can't quote the city policy, but essentially our city policy says that the purpose of the take-home program is to have a presence in the community. You know, some of these cars go to League City, some of them go to Missouri City. There's cars that go to Pasadena, up into Houston, Alvin, all sorts of locations that aren't really our community. I think that's probably the best way I can answer that. It made us essentially evaluate, are we really doing what we were tasked to do, which was get more cars in our community.
And I guess up here, we set that policy, so I think that makes complete sense when we're talking about the marked take-home vehicles. The take-home patrol fleet, I think that certainly makes sense. And I think historically, and I guess back in January, we talked about making that the city limits and potentially ETJ. Councilman Hill talks about circles all the time, and turtles and everything else. But so I get that. So do we need to clarify in the policy? Because I'm not interested in changing how we've done it in the past. I think it's silly to have a car that nobody else can use parked on a lot somewhere that's going to take how many additional man hours for somebody to respond to a call. So I feel like we've lumped them back together. I'd rather deal with them separately, and in the assigned fleet, I don't see any need to change in that regard.
And if I would,
yeah.
you really hit on something that would really help our department, and that is a clear definition and policy.
We've had this discussion every year. It helped
Yes,
me
sir.
too. I mean, it saved us a lot of time because my stance hasn't changed. I don't know that a lot of us has. So whatever we need to do to get policy nailed down, I'm a fan of that. Sounds like we should have done it 5 years ago. So back to assigned fleet. My opinion, I'm fine with how it is. Whatever policy change we need to make, I'd be a fan of looking at some of that language and making that happen. In terms of the take-home, the patrol take-home vehicles, I think we had a good game plan last time. We hashed all this out, slowly pulling some of those cars back to the folks that are driving outside the ETJ, and increasing the numbers. And again, using it as a benefit to the officers as well as the community. I like the map that shows the 3 red dots that land out in Shadow Creek. I think that's great. whether they're on duty, off duty, that's 3 more PD cars that are sitting somewhere that if something does happen, they can likely be on duty pretty quick. And if not, it's sitting there as presence in the community. I'll defer the rest of my comments.
And just to clarify, that would be a total of 46 vehicles, and we are currently set at 35. So again, that would be something that, you know, if you want that changed, that we would need the clarification on.
Councilman Moore?
Yeah, I would be in favor, like Councilmember Carbone said, and we work towards that additional 5 or 6 cars. I've always struggled with the officers that live outside the ETJ. I'm not a fan of that, and I thought we had, the last time we talked about it, a plan to phase those out and bring those cars back in. So, I mean, I would like to see something like that happen. It's an incentive to live in the city. I mean, if you're going to have a take-home car, I mean, it should be benefiting the residents here, not somebody in League City, Alvin, or the Woodlands, or wherever it is. So I'm perplexed at why we're here again, but you brought up the study, so that I guess that's why we're talking about it again, but that's kind of my consensus.
Good, thank you. You know, we annexed 70 square miles and put a 100-foot strip around it, so we have a pretty well-defined area. That 100-foot strip says city limits. So you're inside the city limits. When you go in the 100-foot strip, you then travel a little further, you're in the ETJ, which is not in ours, which was not said. But that's going to be ours for the future, and I think it's important that we keep an eye on what happens out in that area. I know that the county has an obligation to support that area as part of their responsibility, but I think we need to keep an eye on what happens out in that area, and this would give us an opportunity to do that if we had take-homes for people in ETJ. Now, we're doing it in the city, and I think it'd be reasonable. And we had sort of a discussion at one time, like happened about when you take your car home with you, then you want to go to the store or something, you could usually go to the store or things like that. We had talked about the visibility of a car on the street sort of thing. In addition to have one parked by your house, and I've got two of them pretty close to me right down on Churchill, and one down the street from me on Stratford. And I think it's a good idea to have that car sitting out there until he goes back on duty. So I have no problem with that. I think it's a plus for us. I also think we need to start keeping an eye on our 70 square mile footprint that we've locked up. And I don't know how, whether the issue right now is whether we have enough cars to make sure that all that happens. I think it's something maybe we have to phase into it, but I think it's something that we need to give some serious consideration to it. I think that the policy we'd had before with outside of ETJ, I think that's serving area outside of our future footprint. So if we can work something where we can get this in place, get the cars in place without perturbating our budget too much. But you probably have to phase that in, won't you? The car acquisition.
That would obviously be up to y'all on the budget.
That's one of the discussion items we have, and I think we need to look at that because we need to get serious about this. We're gaining population. We have people way down in Lakes of Savannah, way down there. We've got people that are moving down toward the 126, which is our way southbound, is south of 100. So I think it's something we need to give some very serious effort to making sure that one, we have the people taking the car home. And the other thing too, Captain, I think helps us is that I've worked with companies. I worked down at Space Center where we had a pool, And the cars weren't in good shape most of the time because it just, everybody has a different way of driving and they don't fill up that, let you know there's a problem with the oil and so forth. But if a guy, if his car, he's gonna take good care of it because his life depends on it. And I think it would be a cost savings of sharing of expense over the years to have somebody taking care of a car that they're gonna have to drive. And if you catch one that looks dirty and not in good shape, you can fuss at him about it. So I think it's a plus if we could do that, work it out. That's what I know.
Can I
I'm
say
sorry.
one more thing? Does this include the unmarked cars going outside of the ETJ?
I'm sorry, what are you asking, sir?
What we're proposing?
At least from what I've heard from you two, council members, is that you want it to essentially stay the same.
Which is unmarked cars going outside the ETJ.
Correct, which is basically all 31 cars still going outside the ETJ.
Okay,
Because even if those cars are sitting,
they're not used.
they're not being used.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, let me ask a couple of questions to make sure I
Yes.
understand where we are. And I do agree, I think we need to look at policy and get some definitions because I think it's obvious to everyone every time we talk about this, it becomes more complicated, and I think part of that is because the policy might be vague in some areas. But as far as the recommendations, if I look at the police department recommendation, at what point does an officer living inside the city limits get to take a car home? Is that?
So currently, if they are either a supervisor or have an assigned car or an assignment that would have an assigned car, then they would get the car. For everybody else, that is the patrol officers, right now we're maintaining 35 cars in the fleet with the direction that 2 of those cars come back each year. So for example, right now we're at 35 cars, 6 of them are outside the ETJ. So in October, the plan would be to pull 2 of those back in and give 2 of the next 17 that would be otherwise eligible for a car.
Eligibility currently starts at what, isn't it 5 years for patrol?
Yeah, so sorry, current eligibility is actually at 5 years, and many of those 17 are under the 5 years.
Okay,
One of the things that Berkshire recommended is that we get rid of what they felt was an arbitrary number, which is why in our recommendation we said that we just want to make sure they're off through a probationary period.
And the probationary period is
a 1-year time frame.
Okay, so we would be moving from 5 years to 1 year, essentially.
Correct, or incrementally.
I understand,
Yes.
but the policy guidelines would go from, okay. Looking at the assigned vehicles, and I'm assuming that's this list, I don't know what page 3 with the CID, narcotics.
Yes, sir.
That's, okay. I would, and I don't know the job descriptions well enough to speak on this, and I don't want to, and if I pull one out by example, it is strictly an example, but
yes,
I do have some questions on some of them, and the one off the top of my head would be the lobby officer. I mean, if the assignment, but basically what I would kind of like to see is if the assignment is at the police station, and that's where they would report first, what's the rationale for taking the car outside of the city limits? Now, I totally understand investigation. They need to go on site when they're called in. We're increasing response times. So basically where I'm going is if we can keep the car inside the city limit and we can increase response time, I like the take-home car program. If we don't do those two, I view it as a benefit of the job with, and it's just we don't have the money to do that as a strict benefit. So I would kind of like those assigned cars, if we could look at those and job descriptions and when does it fit inside that increasing response time and service.
And I would actually tell you we've actually done that Councilman Ordino. And I'll give you an example, just because you said the lobby officer, and of all of them, that sounds the oddest.
Right.
But the lobby officer's actually been with the department for 20 years. He voluntarily was kind of talked into going into that position. He was a patrol officer, and he's done an absolutely fantastic job, and he actually lives in the city.
And I hate to pull that one out because I totally agree with everything you just said. It was the one that off the top of my head just, but, and I guess where I go with this is if we're going to redo the policy, he's kind of he lives in the city. So that meets criteria number one of increased visibility of patrol cars in the city. So, what happens when we replace that position? Does that really need to be something that we go? Is kind of where I would like to see this. Let's make sure the cars going home either stay in the city or increase response time to the residents is where my thought is at this point.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Captain Randall. So let me just ask you a question real quick. So the suggestion that we move to, based on everything you just said and based on the Berkshire report, the suggestion that we remove the arbitrary number of 5 years and just move to this probationary figure, so at 1 year, I'm assuming that's going to drive the cost up even more because that means we're going to have take-home cars more readily available. I mean, in the patrol fleet.
Yes, sir, it would.
Okay.
But just to clarify, we're not meeting a 5-year mark, so we could call the mark 1 day and the line's just gonna be longer until we budget for it. It's not gonna happen. So whether we call it 1 day or 5 years, it's great. I mean, right now we tell a new hire that you're eligible for one, but the fact of the matter is you can go get number 18 in line for it. So in my mind, okay, so it's arbitrary, whatever. That'd be a goal in my mind. If we can hit that budgetary, I think that'd be great. I think to lead anybody on to say that you're gonna have a take-home car the first year you're here, I don't know that we ever get there.
Provided you live within the city or the
Right,
ETJ.
yeah. So whether we get tied up over 1 year or 5 years, does it matter? We're
I guess the
doing
only
good to fund 5 years.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess the only reason it would matter would be to be able to hit the mark at 5 years, which I presume we would hit quicker than we would at a probationary period, right? I mean, from a math standpoint alone. So
yes.
So I think that's something that should be considered, because if it's a goal, because really it just seems like it's more of a measuring stick. And if the goal is that, then let's do it, knowing that it doesn't mean you're going to get it because we've got, we might not have the potential. However, I think so my point is the overarching issue here is, and I agree with what's been set up here with the council members and Officer DeSpain, is that I think it needs to be defined, and I think we've done that. We've already laid out what we thought before the Berkshire study, and I appreciate the study, but when it comes to take-home cars, I see the assigned fleet as something separate and special, and it's special for a reason, and these officers should have these cars, as we've said, and the take-home car program should be applied to the fleet. And I think that we need to make sure that it's within the city limits and ETJ, as we suggested. And if you look at that map that you put up there earlier, the 18 different red dots, as I counted, as Councilmember Carbone pointed out, 3 of them are west of 288, 2 down in Lakes of Savannah, and then it's a nice spread throughout the city. That's just additional cars. It's just bonus, in my opinion, if you get assigned vehicles stand within inside the city, especially if they're marked. So I think that we separate, like we've already said, keep assigned separate and apply the take-home car program to the fleet. Just keep it the way it was.
One, I would like to thank you, Officer Randall, for all the effort you put in as one of those, I'm sorry, Captain Randall. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Captain Randall and everybody else in the PD staff. It just seems like one of those things that seems simple, and when you dig into it, it's just far more complicated and somewhat opinionated. So, and just just for my clarification, if it's a take-home vehicle, so we in the current program right now, somebody has a take-home vehicle, is that immediately or permanently assigned to that individual only? So he takes it home, he drives it, he takes it home. Nobody else uses that vehicle. So they're technically assigned.
Yes, and for the most part, because once they take the car home, if we're, for example, shorthanded on cars at night, the car is not actually available for use because it's at their house. So, yes, it's essentially assigned to them in the, if we're talking about the patrol take-home fleet, yes, they get a vehicle that's assigned to them.
Yeah,
And most of the time, they'll drive it for years.
I don't think we should use that. I don't think, if you say, I know it's semantics, but I don't think you should say assigned when we're talking about an assigned vehicle program and a take-home, because it's confusing to use that word.
And I appreciate that. I think there's a difference without a real distinction in that the take-home vehicle, the assigned is dedicated to one officer. A take-home is essentially dedicated to one officer. You can label them however they get to the dedication, they're both dedicated to the one officer. So what we have right now, it's a 5-year plan for assigned vehicles to go wherever those individuals live, correct?
No, sir. The only officers that are affected by the 5-year part of the plan are those officers that are in the patrol take-home vehicles. And those are essentially your street cops. Okay. For them, at this point, to get a car, must live within the ETJ and have been in service with us for 5 years.
And if they, sure.
Can you flip to the next slide? Because just the timing piece of it.
This one?
No, the one that shows the dollars.
These
are the amounts that would get you to achieving the take-home cars in fiscal 18.
Yes, sir.
Just for whatever reference. So you could achieve 100% with each of those frameworks with those amounts of money. Just want to make
So,
yes, sir. And I appreciate you pointing that out, Mr. Pearson.
If we modify it to only the city limits, we're saying that certain officers who have specialty jobs but that have an assigned vehicle but live outside the city limits, we would then technically say that they can no longer drive that vehicle outside of the city limits because of the policies that we're trying to push.
Under what was the police department's recommendation, it would have been if they were outside the ETJ.
Okay.
But so far, kind of what I'm hearing from the consensus of council is that those officers would still be able to take those cars.
Yeah, and I'm kind of, maybe this is somewhat different. What I originally wanted to see, and I think what y'all are trying to address is, after 1 year of employment, they're eligible to for any officers eligible for a take-home vehicle, barring budgetary constraints. So if the vehicle's available, it can be assigned to them and dedicated to them, then they're eligible to take it home. And perhaps an assigned vehicle who lives outside of the ETJ, that to Councilmember Carter's own point, that car's sitting, whether it's sitting at his house or sitting at PD, it just sits there. Nobody else can use it. So at that point, if it's a benefit to the officer for morale, and the car is just sitting there, perhaps if we're distinguishing take home and assign, the assigned vehicle, and maybe it's not 1 year, maybe it's 5 years, but the assigned vehicle can go home outside of the ETJ because it doesn't really make a difference whether it's sitting here or sitting at their home, other than the gas to get it back and forth.
Yeah, the per mileage cost.
So, maybe that could be, as I see it, maybe that's a good amalgamation of the two policies. 1 year employment for patrol, vehicles available and can be assigned, to use that word, assigned to that officer, dedicated to that officer, then they can take it home so long as they live in the city limits of ETJ if they're patrol, but not if they live outside of it. If it's an assigned vehicle, and maybe it's not 1 year, and I don't know how long it takes for some of these positions to get to an assigned vehicle. Let's say it's 5 years and you have an assigned vehicle, you're not limited to city limits in ETJ, you just take your car home as you would because it doesn't do us any good for it to sit at the public safety building anyway. I don't know if that's a good compromise or a good hybrid.
Just for clarification, no officer will be assigned to any assigned position or supervisory position until they've been with the department at least a year. So off their probationary period, that's an internal department policy. They're not eligible. However, once that happens, if they are put into an assigned position, we don't have a 5-year rule for that. And kind of from what I'm hearing, at least from the consensus so far, is that because the car wouldn't get used for something else, that you're just saying, just go ahead and let them take it.
All right,
If I could ask one question, this might be a stretch, but my understanding would be, we've already got the assigned vehicles in the fleet, so that wouldn't be a budgetary change, it's just be the operation increment. So the good news would be, if we wanted to, the Berkshire column here, moving up from our current, that would add take-home vehicles for the marked cars only in the city limits, and the police department recommendation would bring us the take-home marked cars, city limits plus ETJ only. So it's not, I mean, it's not huge increments between the 157 and 17 and the 18. I mean, that's the kind of numbers you're talking about. For 18, we can get take-home cars for all the marked vehicles in the city limits and ETJ. If you want to back that off to just the city limits, it's 1.7 million. Is that fair? Or?
Yes, sir, that is correct, but with one caveat, which is currently I'm being told to pull in 2 of those 6 remaining cars per year. That would require all 6 of those cars to come back in the next fiscal year.
Rather than spreading it out.
Correct. But you are correct. If that were the direction of council, which was, hey, effective this next fiscal year, if it's a patrol take-home car and it's outside the ETJ, you bring it in, then for that incremental cost of essentially $238,000, you could actually have 17 additional marked vehicles within the city limits. And the reason that it works out that way is because you're pairing officers up, okay? So where 2 officers are sharing a car, you're actually needing 1 additional car. That's why you get 17 cars for what amounts to 8 total vehicles. And 6 officers come back in, so.
That hits what threshold? The 5-year threshold or the 1-year threshold?
That would hit the 1-year threshold.
1-year threshold, okay.
And which number's that?
That would be the 3rd column there.
1.8?
1.8, yes, sir.
And the 5-year is the 1.5, or not exactly?
Keeping it exactly like you are, it's correct, the 1.5.
Okay. And the 1.8 also leaves the assigned vehicles going home outside of the city limits?
Yes, sir, it does.
The 1.69 for the Berkshire or the ET, all right, does that just take out the ETJ?
That's correct, sir.
And other than the assigned, that really helps. I mean, it seems like for 200,000, we can, as long as we can fit it in the budget, which I stay optimistic about, that we can get this over and done with and get the marked cars into at least the city limits, if not the ETJ, so.
So if I can take a stab, I think we're leaning all towards the PD recommendation column. And then also, I'd like to see the assigned car, or the assigned fleet. Sounds like we've got a policy that's not in writing anywhere. I'd like to see that documented, bring it before us, let's get it approved, put in the books, so we don't have to have this discussion next year.
I want to throw one. So what we're saying right now would be we're going, the 1.8 gets you 1 year they get a car to take home.
Eligible.
Well, but no, they're saying we're going to meet all the numbers that are needed.
You would actually meet that next year.
With the caveat of it's got to fit in the budget. We know it's not going to fit in the budget.
Well, and that's where I have some heartburn is I would like when we go recruit officers and we say, look, if you live in the city, you can get a car at X date. That number's reasonable. I'm not saying we'll be able to hit it all the time, but if that number needs to stay at 5 and we need to budget the 1.8, and we've got reserves, we can throw those into the enterprise fund that would help us buy cars in the future. I would rather see us do that. If that number needs to be 7, because right now with officer with 6 years, there's no hope you're going to get a car. Wherever those numbers work out, I would rather see us budget a little bit more in the years that money's not needed. We do have that enterprise fund, if I remember correct. Yes. set up, that can go there so we have the money in reserve to pay for these cars when we do need it, when we have the hiring. Makes sense to me, and I agree, I want to see a policy for those assigned vehicles. And in that, I really would like to see job descriptions so that, like I said, my main deal is cars in the city or ETJ and response time for our residents. If it doesn't meet those two, I really don't want to see a car going outside the city.
I'm personally kind of fine with the 1 year, and if it means that we have every year we adopt the budget, and we have to have a discussion of we're 2 or 3 vehicles deficient on the take-home, and do we want to budget that or don't? And that means that a couple officers have to have a conversation. So you've not been here long enough to be senior to the people who are eligible, and the vehicles are available to them. But the next year we budget and add the 2 vehicles, or we don't, and we still have that conversation. I prefer that to some kind of mixed bag alternative solution where we're trying to mix years versus budget and have some rolling calculation year to year that's going to be difficult for us or staff to keep track of. I think if we just say a year, council has a conversation every year about how many vehicles we're going to add. PD staff reports to us, here's the policy, here's where we're deficient. Do you want to add those vehicles? We say yes, everybody gets a vehicle. We say no, not everybody gets a vehicle. And it's a policy we do year to year as PD grows. And then, no change to the assign. If they're assigned a vehicle and it doesn't matter where they live, no good for us to hold it.
If I could ask a question just for a consensus standpoint, do y'all consider the supervisors as assigned vehicles, whether they're in patrol or not?
Do you?
My personal opinion is if we're going to do essentially what we're talking about, yes, I think the supervisors should be essentially considered assigned personnel.
I do. I think they should. And I think, and as far as this probationary period, and what Councilmember Ordinance said is that we could still have an enterprise fund and fund it even with the probationary period. Yep. And provided that new officers live within the city of Pearland or within its ETJ, then they'll be eligible, and it's a great recruitment tool. And then we don't have the arbitrary number, but we can still fund it and try to make it happen. And by adopting this police department recommendation to spend more money to do that, I think that's a good idea. But I do think supervisors should be included in the assigned take-home program.
Yeah, because they may need to be called out, right?
I mean, they can get called out.
Yeah,
and,
so,
you end up in a situation where you had the detective sergeant who's there for the next year, would have the car, but then he moves back to patrol. And if this is the route we're going to go, I think it would be much more simple to administer with just saying that if you're a supervisor, it's essentially assigned a car.
I would say it this way. I trust Chief Doyle, future Chief Spires, you. I trust y'all to run the department the way that y'all see fit for the most part. If you believe a supervisor should have an assigned car, I don't really have an argument against it. I've never policed in my life, other than policing in the Army, which means you go pick up trash. So I don't want to make recommendations that may be contrary to what y'all believe is the appropriate terminology for assigning a vehicle. If you think supervisors should be assigned a vehicle, I think you should go for it.
Okay. Captain, I think it's to help your quality of recruitment and retention to have this in place when we do this. So I think it's a plus.
Since I
further question?
Can I ask one more question? I kind of have a feeling I'll probably be helping write 3.07 rewrite. How does council feel about how far out an assigned vehicle can go? So for example, if an officer lives in Galveston, are you okay with a car going to Galveston every day? Are you okay with it going to Freeport every day? Katy, Spring, Montgomery County, is there some limit that you want set up for assigned cars?
I think it's kind of esoteric that we'd have somebody who's assigned a vehicle, works in Pearland, lives in Magnolia. He's been here for a while and has taken an hour and a half long trip to come to Pearland. I think at some point those people would move. So I don't know if I personally don't think that I want to tighten the wrench so tight that we're having so many provisions in there. Who's got to keep track of it to be silly, but who's going to police it?
So I know it sounds kind of silly, but the reason we need this direction is, I'll give you an example. There's a supervisor who's talking about commuting from Austin at some point in the next few years. Given how his schedule works, he's on the 12-hour schedule. And if there is no defined boundary, then essentially he would be permitted to take that car to Austin back and forth.
And I would need to look at a map because I honestly hadn't thought that far out, but off the top of my head, I would say a county that exists within the city limits of Pearland. And I think that takes care of a pretty broad.
Yeah, contiguous counties.
Yeah. I mean, because we have Harris County, we have Galveston County.
Yeah, Galveston.
Oh, I'm sorry, Galveston County wouldn't be in Pearland. I mean, and honestly, Galveston, I don't have a problem with Galveston if we're going to allow Katy. So
Hey, Captain, I think we'll defer to you on that if you come back with something reasonable.
Yeah, okay.
We're all
Thank you.
reasonable.
But I think to Ordino's point, you could just do contiguous counties, contiguous to Brazoria County, and that's a pretty big area. I mean, I would, and if you think about it too, I mean, over time, I mean, if you have an officer that comes in and they want to take advantage of the take-home car program and they're new or they're a rookie officer, well, then they're going to live in Pearland. And I presume over time, they're going to promote within Pearland.
And that's what we hope.
It would be, I get your point, I think it's something we should look at, but I don't know how, I mean, they're not going to uproot and move, I wouldn't think, if they've been in Pearland for, 10 to 13 years, hopefully not, yeah, so.
I would like to see some kind of mileage distance, because you talk Harris County, I mean, you could be 2-hour drive away.
I think I would just prefer not to micromanage the department and tell them, yeah, if y'all have a policy that says, but is not directed by us, you have a policy that says the contiguous or a mileage difference, and that's what you enforce, that's fine. I think that the difference between Galvin and Austin is fairly obvious. If you have somebody, I want to commute back to Austin, and y'all have the authority to say, you're not going to take home a vehicle in that condition. But we've told you, no limitation, so then you feel required to allow them to do it. I'd rather let those kind of judgment calls on distance and where that's allowed on an assigned vehicle be up to the department to make as a policy.
Well, you getting some help?
I think we got there. Yes, sir.
Captain, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Let's move, unless we have some more from Clay on this particular issue, let's move in our agenda to mayor council issues from future council agendas. Any items for council? You had one, but Derek had it.
Oh, the fire.
Yeah, I think we gave enough direction. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Okay. Item 8 on the agenda lets me do something called adjourn, which I shall do at 9:29. Thank you all for being here.